fools, we know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You are watching Britain's Newsroom. This is Andrew and Bev. PMQs will be up in, about 10 minutes or so. So we're joined in the studio now by former Labour MP and Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane.
I was gossiping too when I should have been looking at the camera.
You're always
your fault,
gossiping.
Dennis. It's your fault.
Oh, I don't worry. I had hold of the ship talking about Penny Mordaunt and Conservative MP Mark Francois.
What's going on with that tie, Mark Francois?
This is a SAFA tie. So it's a very well-known military charity,
Right.
and they look after veterans and people serving in the armed forces.
Oh, I thought there'd be a story attached to it.
Thank you.
That brings us to Prime Minister's questions, because I suspect this story about Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, saying the European Court of Human Rights, it's protecting terrorists. He's not saying come out of it, but it's going to come up, isn't it? As an issue?
I would be surprised if it didn't, put it that way.
And what's your view?
Well, when we talked about this before in regard to boats, Andrew, I have said at the very least, Dennis may disagree, on the boats issue, we should have just told the ECHR.
Quite.
This is none of your business, rather like
Right.
we did on prisoner voting. You know,
Yeah.
we should. The problem is the Strasbourg court historically always overreaches its own powers, and so I think our own sovereign parliament, just as we did on prisoner voting, from time to time would be within our rights to say this has nothing to do with you, and if they don't accept that, then we should legislate.
Dennis McShane, do you disagree?
Yes, because
you
prisoner
do.
voting
I'm
prisoner voting was never a convention of the Council of Europe. It was a proposal, and we said no thanks. I discussed it with Home Secretaries. They're just very nervous of public opinion. In Switzerland and other countries, very democratic. They've had it for years. Not a big argument. On this, don't forget, it was the Council, or rather the European Convention on Human Rights, that stopped, frankly, hooding, and let's be honest, Mark, torture of IRA terrorists. They're bad people. They're being tortured by British security services in a way that if it happened in Russia or China, we would go crazy. And they stepped in and stopped it. And do you know something? It didn't affect the balance, as it were, of authority or power. So I don't know what Ben Wallace really is, why he's surfacing again. He tried to get the NATO job. He was rejected by everybody.
Well, he's giving his first interview since he was Defence Secretary, and he's saying his hands were tied by this wretched organisation.
Sorry, the Defence Secretary does not put people in prison, does not arrest people. The police do.
He directs terrorist operations.
No, the security operation. No,
Well, he's involved in it.
No,
He's the Defence Secretary.
the MOD is not in charge of counter-terrorism. That is...
No, but Dennis, remember, Ben, in fairness to him, was the security minister
Yes.
for more than 2 years before he moved to the MOD. And I spoke to him a few days after he'd left office, and I said, was it true, this thing about you having 3 phones by your bed? He said yes. He said one was my personal mobile, one was my departmental phone, and the third was a top-secret phone. And he said, even now I've left office, when I get out of a car, I still pat myself down to say, where are my 3 phones? Even though I know I no longer have 3, if you see what I mean.
Well, when I came back in the car with Tony Blair from Trips,
Oh, he's such a
he'd
name
say,
dropper.
sorry if you don't... Well, he's dropped Ben Wallace's now. I can drop Tony's.
Well, hang on, we're talking about Ben Wallace.
And Tony would say, have you got your mobile with you? Because the security services, or number 10 Wallace, wouldn't let Blair go anywhere with a mobile phone, because any mobile phone is penetrable by the Chinese.
I mean, there are very good, there are very good reasons.
Even then.
Yeah.
You've been watching this morning, haven't you? Something that's been going on at Westminster. Tell us, you've come hot-footing it from there,
Yes,
haven't you,
I
Mark?
have. There was a 90-minute debate in Westminster Hall, which is Parliament's second debating chamber, about government proposals to close ticket offices.
At train stations.
Yeah.
A mad idea.
Well, I agree. It was packed, and not a single backbencher who spoke from any of the parties,
Isn't that
not a
interesting?
single Tory backbencher defended the government's position. And I, amongst others, said to the minister, look, look around you,
Yeah.
take the hint, retreat gracefully, drop it.
And it's been a gift for the wretched unions, Mark, because they're using that as another reason to carry on with the strikes.
The problem, in my opinion, I mean, this came out in the debate. I mean, you can get the clips. the government are being completely tin-eared about this. And I regret to say that was reflected in the minister's mind.
In order to appease who, Dennis McShane? Let me ask you, who is it good for if we close the ticket offices?
Bonkers. I don't understand.
No, I
the
don't.
point of being a cabinet secretary is to say no permanent secretary. And whatever, that was a blob proposal, a civil service proposal. I don't even know who the transport secretary is.
Mark Harper.
Well, whoever he is.
Who's got, if he walked into this building, I would say 99.9% of people wouldn't know him.
Anyway, it's a crazy
low profile
idea.
is an understatement.
Well,
am I
And
right?
I'm glad Mark was leading.
But it's not about, it's about profit, surely.
Well, look, I said in the debate, right, the game's not worth the candle. Sometimes, you know, you see this in government, the civil servants come up with a proposal, the rail industry are backing it at least in part, and you get these benefits. And if you're a minister, you look at this, and if you apply some political antennae, Dennis will know that you kind of say, is this really worth all the pain and the flak we're going to take?
No.
And I honestly, and this was very much the tenor of the debate. By no means was it just me. The absolute tenor of the debate was, this isn't worth it.
Do you not also, sorry, but do you not also, rather than just saying, is it worth the pain, do you not also say, is this right for people?
Quite.
Oh, no, well, yes.
But on that,
don't misunderstand me, but I think Andrews was a sort of a political question.
Yeah, it was.
It's not good for people with disabilities, it's not good for people
That's
who have
right.
to travel with short notice. Oh, no, all of this came out in the debate.
Good.
And it's not just that. I'll tell you an example. So recently I was getting a train to somewhere in Norfolk. I went to the machine. I couldn't believe how much the machine was asking.
Well,
I went to the ticket office at Victoria. Half price.
Right, well,
They
Chris
got me
Loader...
a much cheaper ticket. That's what
to your
they
point,
required.
Chris Loader, who introduced the debate, worked
Tory
for
MP.
worked for years on the railways.
Yeah.
Okay, so, he knows what he's talking about. And he made this point very well, which is that one of the reasons the rail companies want to drive you onto their websites...
Absolutely.
Or to use ticket machines is because your options may be limited.
That's right.
He made this. It will all be in Hansard, and he said quite often you get a much better deal.
Yeah.
if you speak
That's
to
what
a
I mean.
human in a
Profit.
ticket
You do.
office.
It's about profit.
So but you can see why some of the train companies want to get rid of the
That's right.
ticket.
Of course they
tin
do.
ears,
To
on
rip
tin
people
ears,
off.
a big tin ear thing I read over the weekend, I don't know whether Mark would agree or not, is the Treasury briefing they want to kill the triple lock. Now, I can think of nothing that will guarantee more Labour votes if the Tories come up and say to all the pensioners of Britain, something that you've had introduced by Labour, the Tories just before the election are going to take it away, so you'll be
They won't
poorer
do it.
next year. Well, they're briefing
And
hard.
but Labour today, West Streeting, refused to say whether Labour would keep the triple lock.
Labour will say nothing. You've heard of defunding the police, you've heard of debanking. Labour are de-targeting. They're so far under the table. They're not
They won't commit to anything, will they?
They won't quite right to.
Dennis, when he's got his mobile phone on him, I haven't got Tony Blair on speed dial, right? And you may do. The suggestion is, and I put it to you because you're in a much better place to comment than I am, that Starmer is getting a lot of, backstairs advice from Blair. He talks to him a lot.
He is.
And the suggestion is that the essence of Blair's advice is keep your head below the parapet, don't commit to anything, just, kind of wind down the clock.
And let the Tories screw everything
that
up.
true, Dennis?
Which they're doing.
Well, so you don't need Tony Blair to say it would be great if Harry Kane could score goals. I mean, everybody in Labour's been agreed on that since Starmer took over. He had to drain the Corbyn momentum poison out of us. The Tories, when they go into opposition, will drain all the Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, wacko sort of Brexit nonsense.
Wacko
out of their
Brexit
system.
nonsense? How dare you, Brexit
Well, look,
nonsense?
Mr Sunak's doing it now. He's
We did win the last general election by 80 seats, Dennis.
Yeah,
you do
because of
remember that,
Corbyn.
don't you?
I campaigned in the Red Wall, and I've been in this
Well, you'd
game
have
a
put 'em
long
right
time, encountered such anger by voters, Labour voters, at the impertinence of the Labour Party, suggesting that somebody like Jeremy Corbyn was a suitable Prime Minister.
Well,
of any other good qualities. Just like when you put in Liz Truss, I thought,
Look, Dennis,
I hope she's there
very,
for the next
very
election.
minor historic moment here. Francois agrees with McShane live on national television. I did some campaigning for personal friends in the Red Wall in 2019. And what was really interesting, this bears out your point, to be fair, you knocked on a door, lifelong Labour voters, and they didn't say, I'm not voting Labour. They said, I'm not voting for Corbyn,
That's right.
stroke for him, stroke for that bloke, and then, there were a whole sort of variations on a theme by Paganini, some which got quite fruity. But you're absolutely right, in a lot of those seats, it was viscerally anti-Corbyn. But Here's the difference between your man Blair and your man Starmer. I was a Tory candidate in 1997, and I was schlepping up and down the back streets of Kilburn and Willesden Green the dying years of the major government. So that was a proper apprenticeship. By that stage, people had bought Blair in a big way.
Yeah.
You could feel it.
Yeah.
They haven't bought Keir Starmer.
That's absolutely,
Absolutely.
right.
I don't particularly disagree.
Crikey, that's twice now.
What they've also done is they've sold all their Tory shares. I mean, Sunak is just so weak, wobbly, indifferent, tin-eared, doesn't get anything right. We know he's a billionaire. His wife is the richest woman in the world.
Come on, what's that got to do with it?
It's got everything.
He's married to a rich woman.
Well, for heaven's sake, Mark will remember, or maybe not in 1997, because he came in 2001.
Yeah.
All you ever read in the Daily Mail was what a terrible woman, and it was another word beginning with W used, about Cherie Blair. Now, I think Mrs Sunak seems a very nice person. I know Cherie, she's an exceptionally nice person. The trouble is, the Sunaks are not remotely in touch with anybody in the country.
And nobody voted for him.
Dennis, I've never believed in the politics of envy, so I don't think it's fair to criticise the Prime Minister for the fact that, you know, to use a 19th century phrase, he married well. You know, I don't think it's fair to attack him for that. You know, have a go at him on his policies, but leave his family out.
And we could have a look go on a lot of his policies.
Well, let's
ask you quickly on the triple lock. Are you going to keep it? Are you going to
as far as I know, we are.
And you want to?
For the moment, I think we have to, yeah.
Because, let's face it, people over the age of 60 are the ones who vote Tory. If you take the triple lock away, it's another reason they're not going to vote for the Tories.
Well, that's why Dennis is trying to make an issue of it.
Of course it is.
Well, let's see if it's raised. That's what my curiosity... Well, I think that's far more important, frankly, than what Ben has to say.
So if you were Starmer, what would you go on today? What would you go on?
Well, I would just go on. I think ticket offices aren't a bad one. If somebody was in there in that 90-minute debate in Westminster Hall, it's a very good indicator of where MPs are. Mark, it's absolutely
Where the public
the big cheeses sitting in their ministerial or leader or opposition offices just actually don't know a lot of what happens in Parliament. I hope somebody would listen to him on that. Oddly enough, I think Mr Sunak saying let's rejoin Frontex.
We have Dennis, as much as we'd love to listen to you, we'd rather listen now to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. We're going over to the House of Commons because it's Prime Minister's question time from Rishi Sunak and the House of Commons.
Of distinguished service. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Crystal Wall. Mr Speaker, the wealth of billionaires has skyrocketed over the past decade, whilst average working households in the UK have the lowest living standards since the 1950s. Whilst hard-working families are struggling to make ends meet, the wealthy are playing by a different set of rules, with reports even that members of the House of Lords are trying to exploit the non-dom status loophole to avoid paying their fair share. So does the Prime Minister agree that whether you're the wife of the most powerful man in the country or the host of The Apprentice, no billionaire should qualify for special tax treatment while my constituents face soaring levels of inequality and poverty?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr Speaker, the facts tell a very different story to what the honourable gentleman said. He mentioned inequality. Inequality today is lower than it was in 2010. He mentioned the number. He mentioned the number of people in poverty, Mr Speaker. Again, I'm pleased to say there are 1.7 million fewer people in poverty today than 2010, including many in Scotland. But, Mr Speaker, of course we understand that things are challenging right now with the cost of living, which is why we've put in place record support to help families, particularly with their energy bills, and particular for the most vulnerable in our society, with record amounts of cost of living payments going to millions across the country, including in Scotland, showing the power of the United Kingdom government.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thanks to this Conservative government, we have the opportunity to be the first country in the world to end new cases of HIV by 2030. And this is partially down to our world-leading opt-out HIV testing programme rolled out in very high prevalence areas. But to reach this goal and make this progress, we must roll out opt-out testing to other high prevalence areas like in the West Midlands, which includes my constituency of West Bromwich East. So will the Prime Minister commit to meeting with me and the incredible Terence Higgins Trust to hear more about the merits of opt-out testing? testing.
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue and indeed thank her for her work in this area. We remain absolutely committed to ending new HIV transmissions within England by 2030, and I'm pleased that she highlighted that the provisional data from NHS England indicates that the opt-out testing programme has been highly successful. DHSC is currently evaluating the impact of the programme with a view to deciding whether it should be expanded in additional areas, and I know ministers will keep her and the House updated.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his words about the Clerk of the House? Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to the police who tracked down the escaped terror suspect from Wandsworth Prison last week. Despite being charged with terrorism and despite being a flight risk, he was not held in a Category A prison. Why not?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the police and their partners for their efforts to find and arrest Daniel Khalif. There is now an ongoing legal process that must be allowed to take its course. But I'd like to reassure the public that while these cases are extremely rare, the Justice Secretary has launched an internal investigation about how this could happen, as well as an independent investigation of the incident, so that we can learn the lessons from this case and make sure that it never happens again.
Keir Starmer.
The truth is they're presiding over mayhem in the criminal justice system. Only a few short months ago, Zara Alina's family said ministers had, and this is their words, blood on their hands after probation failures that led to her murder. So it beggars belief that we're back here once again. The Chief Inspector of Prisons said conditions in Wandsworth are so bad it should be shut down. The Chancellor is telling anyone who'll listen that he raised concerns months ago. Probation, school buildings, now prisons. Why does the Prime Minister keep ignoring the warnings until it's too late?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman with his background should know better that because of the wide variety. Because of the wide variety and considerable difference in severity of people charged under that Act, it is not and has never been the policy that they are all held in Category A prisons, something that I shouldn't need me to point out to him given his experience. But he talks about resourcing. I am happy to tell him that over the last few years, we have delivered an extra 4,000 new prison officers. Staffing levels at Wandsworth in particular are up by 25% in the past 6 years. And because we're boosting prison pay, we're also improving retention and at the same time investing £100 million to improve prison security with new measures like X-ray body scanners. But if he wanted to have a truly honest debate about this, perhaps he'd acknowledge that prison escapes under the Labour government were almost 10 times higher than under the Conservative government.
I did say last week, and it will continue this week. Who wants to start this session by leaving? Please do so. I'm happy to help you on your way. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, every week, whatever the topic, he paints this picture as if everything is great and fine out there. It's so at odds with the lived experience in the real world. Let me turn to another serious security concern. Some in this House face sanction, intimidation and threats from the Chinese state. When I asked the Prime Minister on Monday whether the Foreign Secretary raised the specific issue of the alleged spy arrested in March when he visited China a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister would only say that he raised that type of activity, but avoided specifics. So I asked the Prime Minister again, did the Foreign Secretary raise this specific case when he visited China? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, I'll refer to my previous answer where I said very clearly that the Foreign Secretary raised these issues with the Chinese Foreign Minister who he met, as did I when I had my meeting with Premier Li over the weekend. But when it comes to China, Mr. Speaker, this government has put in place the most robust policy that has existed ever in our country's foreign policy. It is to protect our country for the values and the interests that we stand up for. It is to align our approach with our closest allies, including those in the G7 and the Five Eyes, and is to engage where it makes sense, either to advance our interests or, as I did at the weekend, to raise our very significant concerns. That is the right approach to China. It is one that is welcomed by each and every single one of our allies, and I'd be interested to know what he thinks that he would do differently.
Well, that certainly wasn't a yes. And what he says now is totally at odds with the Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee report of July this year. That set out that the government has no clear strategy when it comes to China, has failed to support the intelligence agencies, and is leaving the UK severely handicapped in managing our future security. This has been raised time and time again. But yet again, the Prime Minister fails to heed the warnings and is now desperately playing catch-up. So will he finally commit to the full audit of UK-China relations, which so many in this House have so long demanded?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as always, the Leader of the Opposition is just playing catch-up and hasn't caught up with the reality of what's actually happening. He talks about the ISC report. Again, if he actually went through it, he would realise that it related to a period of investigations which was in 2019 and 2020. Since then, Mr. Speaker, we have launched a whole new integrated review refresh of our China strategy. It's published. We've put in place a range of new measures, including, for example, the National Security Protective Agency, which is staffed out of MI5, supporting businesses and organisations and being alert to the risk from cyber and from China. But if he wants to talk about foreign policy, Mr. Speaker, he should perhaps reflect on his own record, because this was the man who said he was 100% behind the former Labour leader, a person who wanted to abolish the army, scrap Trident and withdraw from NATO. It's clear what he did. He put his own political interests ahead of Britain's.
Mr. Speaker, probation, prison, schools, China, yet again inaction man fails to heed the warning and then blames everyone else for the consequences. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, the Home Secretary celebrated her first anniversary in post. That is, if you overlook the 6 days she missed when she was deemed a national security risk. In that year, 40,000 people have crossed the Channel on a small boat, and the taxpayer is now spending £6 million a day on hotel bills. He's failing to stop terrorists strolling out of prison, failing to guard Britain against hostile actors. He's completely failing to stop the boats. How can anyone trust him to protect the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about trust. He talks about action. Just today, this government is taking action to reform defective EU laws to unlock over 100,000 homes, boosting our economy, supporting jobs and ensuring that we can realise the aspirations of homeowners. Now, he talks about trust. He tried in this House to talk the talk on house building. But at the first sign of a cheap political hit, what did he do? He's caved in, Mr. Speaker. Rather than make the right long-term decisions for the country, he's taken the easy way out. It is typical of the principles-free, conviction-free type of leadership that he offers. Flip-flopping from being a builder to a blocker. Mr. Speaker, the British public can't trust a word he says.
Mr. Speaker, every week he comes here protesting that nothing's his fault, trying to convince anyone who's still listening that everything is great. The truth is, the floor fell in for millions of families because of their economic mayhem. The classroom ceilings collapsed because he cut vital school budgets. And now the walls of our national security have been breached because they've ignored repeated warnings. No one voted for these shambles. No one voted for him. So how much more damage do the British public have to put up with before he finally finds the stomach to give them a say?
Mr. Speaker, we are getting on for the British public just in the last week, announcing a new landmark deal for British scientists, attracting £600 million of new investment for our world-leading auto industry, and wages now rising at the fastest rate on record, Mr. Speaker. And where has he been this week? Locked away with Labour's union paymasters. promising to give them more power and scrap the laws that protect British families and their access to public services. It's clear it's only the Conservatives that are on the side of the hard-working British public.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last week, with Yorkshire colleagues, I met with our local integrated care board to discuss plans for improving dentistry provision. But when surgeries suddenly closed to NHS patients without notice, as one in Harrogate did very recently, an immediate strain is put on local provision. Will the Prime Minister look at what can be done in these circumstances to ensure that no one is left without access to an NHS dentist?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this, and we will look into this issue. He'll be reassured to know we're investing £3 billion a year into dentistry. There is no geographical restriction on which dental practice a patient may attend, and practices should keep all their records up to date, including whether they are accepting new patients. And typically where a practice ends a contract, NHS England and ICBs should work together to ensure that that funding is reallocated and patients continue to have access to NHS dental care.
SNP Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, as someone who spends more money heating their swimming pool than the total value of the UK state pension, I think it's safe to say that the Prime Minister might not be as invested in this topic as some others. But let's afford him the opportunity to clear up any confusion. Will he commit his party, the Conservative Party, to maintaining the state pension triple lock beyond the next general election? Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is the party that introduced the triple lock, Mr. Speaker. This is the party that has delivered a £3,000 increase in the state pension since 2010. It's also the parties that ensure that there are 200,000 fewer pensioners living in poverty today, and this winter ensuring that pensioners get an extra £300 alongside their winter fuel payment to support them through the challenging times with inflation. So, Mr. Speaker, our track record is clear. There is one party in this House that has always stood up for our pensioners, and that is the Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think we heard a yes there. And you'll imagine my shock, my utter surprise that we appear to have consensus once again between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party on this most important of issues, despite the promises that were made to the people of Scotland in 2014, and despite the clear statements from the likes of Gordon Brown that the only way to protect your pension is to remain within the UK. How hollow those words are now. So may I ask the Prime Minister, who does he think will scrap the state pension triple lock first? His government or the Labour Party's government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, thanks to the actions of this government, pensioners in Scotland are receiving record increases in their state pension, £870 this year. Extra support with the cost of living this winter. This is the government that introduced and remains committed to the triple lock. But he does raise a good point, Mr. Speaker. Pensioners in Scotland should know the reason they can rely on the state pension, not just today but for years to come, because of the strength of our union and the strength of our United Kingdom government.
Mr. Speaker, beautiful Eastbourne is perhaps best known as a top visitor destination, but there is important work being done also to put us on the digital map. DigiFest, the first local event of its kind, is coming to the Welcome Building next week and will showcase some pretty stellar local tech talent and open doors of opportunity, with an ambition to create 10,000 local jobs in this sector. Would the Prime Minister applaud event organisers Chalk, Eastbourne and Switchplane and lay out what this government is doing to make sure Great Britain and Eastbourne is one of the best places in the world to be involved in this continually groundbreaking sector?
Mr. Speaker, the government has a mission to make the UK the most innovative economy in the world, and the growth of our tech industry is one of the key ways we'll achieve that. I'm delighted to join my honourable friend in thanking and paying tribute to Chalk Eastbourne for their terrific organisation of the DigiFest. This is a great example of how in local areas we can bring together people to create jobs and opportunity and ultimately drive the growth that our country wants to see.
And David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, after being referred by their GP, 22,000 people waited more than 4 months to start urgent treatment for cancer. a terrible wait, twice as long as the government's maximum 62-day pledge. A cancer target it hasn't met once since 2015. We all have loved ones whose lives have been turned upside down by cancer, and we all know that every day counts. Waiting reduces the chances of survival. So will the Prime Minister tell people waiting anxiously to start their cancer treatment, when will this cancer target be met?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely right that we do everything we can to speed up cancer diagnosis. The pandemic has had a significant impact on cancer recovery. He'll know that before the pandemic we had something like 200,000 cancer referrals a month, but during the pandemic it dropped to around 80,000, and now as those referrals come through, that's having an impact. But, Mr. Speaker, we're ensuring that there are hundreds more oncologists and radiologists working this year compared to last year. We're rolling out over 160 community diagnostic centres, because the honourable gentleman is right that early diagnosis is key, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, even though there is work to do, cancer treatment today is at record levels. So we are making progress, and the 62-day backlog is now falling. Recently, the NHS wrote to all trusts streamlining our targets, clinically advised, and now all the focus is on meeting them as quickly as possible.
Chris Green. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2017, Bolton Custody Suite was closed by the Police and Crime Commissioner and the then Chief Constable because they had given up on arresting criminals. The new chief is delivering on the people's priorities so that emergency calls are answered promptly, crimes are investigated and arrests are made, which means the newly reopened custody suite is always full. Will my right honourable friend join me in thanking Greater Manchester Police? And does he think that this approach ought to catch on around the country?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am delighted with the improvements that have been made in Greater Manchester Police, and indeed the Home Secretary just recently met with the Chief there. They have made significant improvements to answering 999 calls, for example, and have seen almost a 50% year-on-year increase in the number of charges recorded by the force. I very much welcome their focus on getting the basics on crime and antisocial behaviour right, and they are a model for police forces across the country.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his answer to the Honourable Member for Aberdeen South, but I'm still confused on this matter because just yesterday the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions said that the pensions triple lock is not sustainable. The Chancellor's economic advisers have suggested that it is time to review the policy, but Number 10, when questioned, have said they're committed to it. So, Mr. Speaker, which is it?
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to the triple lock. It was this government that introduced the triple lock. And she might want to have a word with her own deputy leader, who I don't think provided much clarity on the matter. And remember, Mr. Speaker, I think we all remember when it came to pensions, what we can remember is Gordon Brown's 75p a week increase.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Week in, week out, as I meet businesses in my constituency of Meriden, I hear about how artificial intelligence is transforming the way we work in sectors like life sciences, the automotive sector and financial services. Does my right honourable friend agree that artificial intelligence will transform the way humanity will live in the 21st century? And through his upcoming Global AI Summit, will he ensure that appropriate guardrails are put in place to protect society as we become world leaders in this technology?
Prime Minister. My honourable friend is right to highlight the incredible power of AI to transform not just businesses and our productivity, but also public services in areas like health and education. But we do need guardrails to allow us to make the most of the opportunities of AI and to address risks. Our regulatory approach sets out a responsible and proportionate approach to AI that balances risk and innovation, and I look forward to working with international partners about how we do this at a global level at our upcoming AI Safety Summit.
Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Luton Airport is trying to massively expand its airport capacity from 18 million passengers per year to a whopping 32 million passengers per year. This will blight the lives of thousands of residents across Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, and especially in North St Albans, who live under the flight path, but it will also fly in the face of the advice from the government's own climate advisers. It's been reported that the Prime Minister is getting ready to ignore his climate advisers. Is that true?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, but what I would say is my approach to getting to net zero is not one that requires people to give up doing the things that they want to do and enjoying, like flying. The right thing to be doing is, as we are, investing in new technologies and funding them, things like sustainable aviation fuel, because that's how we'll decarbonise aviation on the transition to net zero, not force people to give everything up.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he put the full might of the Treasury behind the 10-year drug strategy, which with its ADA project is now turning lives around across England and Wales. But a key part of that strategy was developing a new approach to possession. He will know from his own constituency that in towns like Andover, in mine, possession is of a huge concern, particularly to parents of young people who spend some time in the town centre. Now, the Home Office issued a white paper on this over a year ago. The consultation closed in October last year. So can I ask the Prime Minister to commit that in the forthcoming King's Speech we can see some legislation to finally deal with this pernicious problem?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for all of his work and attention on this area. It was good to work with him on Project ADA in particular. He's right to highlight that drugs destroy lives and families, hitting the most vulnerable in our society the hardest. The 10-year drug strategy, which he helped put in place, is ambitious and backed with a record £3 billion funding. As my right honourable friend highlighted, we have consulted on a new drug possession offences framework, and I can assure him that ministers will keep him and this House updated on future plans.
Kate Alone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last few hours, I've been contacted by the head teacher of St James's Church of England Primary School in Blackburn. The head teacher is desperately seeking help after a RAC survey conducted on the 7th of September was inconclusive. The urgent intrusive inspection that was supposed to follow has not been arranged by the Department of Education. The potentially affected part of the building has been closed off, with children crammed into a dining room learning on tables. Staff are unable to access facilities and the whole school has been hugely inconvenienced. The head teacher has been unable to reach the Department of Education. Can I implore the Prime Minister to get the Secretary of State to Education to investigate this urgently?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, I'm sorry for the disruption at schools as we work hard to identify those affected. But what DfE is doing is fully funding the inspection process, ensuring that we are rapidly now inspecting and surveying all potentially affected schools, paying for that work, but also now with the increase of up to 80 dedicated caseworkers, St James's Primary School, like others, should have a dedicated point of contact to work through those issues. I'll ensure that the Secretary of State and the Department are in touch with the school and the Honourable Member on it for an update.
Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Personally, I know the stark impact of dementia and the effect it has on the families of our million citizens who live with it. It was my honour last week to sponsor Alzheimer's research here in the UK to highlight the recent progress on a new diagnostic test and new drugs that could be available as early as next January. I welcome dementia's inclusion in the government's major condition strategy. But would my right honourable friend ask his Secretary of State to convene a dementia medicines task force so that we can take advantage of this progress in research? And would he consider Alzheimer's Research's request for a dementia champion?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by thanking my honourable friend for his work in this important area. Regulators are working closely with industry to evaluate new dementia medicines because, of course, we want patients to benefit from rapid access to safe and effective treatments. We're also strongly committed to funding dementia research, including doubling the amount allocated to this to £160 million a year by next year. And last year we launched the Dame Barbara Windsor Dementia Mission, backed up with new funding, which will work with industry to develop biomarkers, data and digital science innovations and strengthen our trials in dementia. And I look forward to hearing from him more suggestions about.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the 1990s, under the Conservative government, people were dying because of the length of time they were waiting on NHS waiting lists. In 2023, we've seen an increasing number of people dying while they're on NHS waiting lists before they get treatment. Is the Prime Minister ashamed that people are dying needlessly under his watch?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, the number on waiting lists has been impacted significantly by the pandemic, but that's why we've put record funding in place to help address it, including new innovations like surgical hubs, same-day emergency care, virtual wards, and such like. But I would gently point out to the honourable gentleman, in England, partly the reason that the waiting lists are not coming down as fast as we would like is because of strike action by doctors, something that is supported by him and his colleagues who have stood on the picket lines ensuring that patients cannot get access to care. It is also him and his party that are saying that they will repeal the laws that we have put in place that will guarantee patients safe access to medical treatment in the event of industrial action. So if he wants to make this issue emotional, he should say to people, why is it that he believes patients should be deprived of access to life-saving care because of industrial action, Mr.
Closed question. Question 11.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we regularly engage with local partners across the West Midlands to gather insight and intelligence on the economy. Earlier this year, we initiated the Trailblazer devolution deal, which will help include measures to help businesses thrive. And I see that just the other week, Business Growth West Midlands was launched by the Mayor, backed with £100 million in funding for business support.
Michael Fabricant.
I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, and I'm glad to hear that the West Midlands growth continues to expand. However, we do have a problem in Lichfield, and that is road closures, and we don't know how long they're going to go on for, footpath closures, we don't know how long they're going to go on for, HS2 who are doing these closures, one hand doesn't know what the other hand is saying. HS2, Mr. Speaker, is the most dysfunctional organisation I've ever had to deal with. Will the Prime Minister, in the short term, try and restructure HS2 so it works like a company should? And in the longer term, can he save other constituencies by stopping HS2 at the end of phase 1?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that the frustration that this is causing to my honourable friend's constituents. I am told that HS2 Limited is prioritising the completion of works underway to keep disruption to a minimum, including roadworks in Lichfield, but I know the Transport Secretary will continue to hold them to account, and the company will keep local communities informed about future works.
Mahadi.
Mr. Speaker, UK bill payers are facing an extra £1 billion because of the government's failure to agree new offshore wind. With Russia using energy as a weapon, when will the Prime Minister take energy security seriously and protect us from the whims of fossil fuel autocrats?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we do take energy security seriously. Indeed, we created a brand new department to focus on energy security. But it's a bit rich. It's a bit rich coming from the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, that wants to cut off our access to homegrown British oil and gas, Mr. Speaker, which will increase our reliance on foreign oil and gas, increase our reliance on dictators and exposure to those markets, and as the independent reports have also said, will be bad for the climate, as those imported fossil fuels come with something like 2 or 3 times the emissions. Their policy is not just bad for the environment, Mr. Speaker, it's bad for our energy security and it's bad for British jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The collapse of a potential rescue deal for Wilko this week brings added urgency to the regeneration of our town centres and driving that forward. Would you agree to meet myself and the leader of Torbay Council to identify ways through government support and planning reform this can be accelerated?
Well, Mr. Speaker, investment through both arms of our Towns Fund is part of how we will regenerate and unleash the potential of our town centres. I'm delighted to hear that that investment includes Torbay's £21.9 million town deal and indeed £13.5 million for Paynton via the Future High Streets Fund. But my honourable friend is right about ensuring that our planning system is friendly for small businesses, and that's what we're doing, making it much easier to convert unused shops into cafes, restaurants or indeed new homes, and it's an example of how we're helping our high streets adapt and thrive.
Lawrence Eshelman.
Mr. Speaker, the new Defence Secretary has been quoted as saying that there could be RAC present in military buildings. So can the Prime Minister today guarantee the safety of our military personnel and equipment, or is this yet another ticking time bomb that the government has failed to see coming?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, actually across the public sector, departments make sure that they follow the technical guidance with regard to RAC, identify and mitigate as required. And as you've seen, with example in the NHS, we have moved hospitals affected into the new hospital programme. But also, more generally, this is the government that has invested record sums in defence, £24 billion at the last spending review, the single biggest uplift in defence spending since the end of the Cold War.
Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's vitally important that we retain, recruit and protect our prison officers. So will the Prime Minister agree to stop any prisoner who assaults a prison officer from being released early from jail? This simple measure will be very popular with prison officers. It will be very popular with the public. And you never know, Mr. Speaker, it might even find favour with the parties opposite, who normally think that the only people who should be in prison are people who misgender people.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, prisoners, my honourable friend is right, the prisoners who are violent towards people working and living in prisons will and should face the full consequences of their actions. I'm pleased that the recent Police Crime Sentencing in Courts Act actually increased the maximum penalty for up to 2 years imprisonment for those who assault emergency workers, and that includes prison officers. And the Ministry of Justice will continue to press for charges for more serious offences, such as ABH, where appropriate.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the weekend, 7 global economic powers came together, including India, the US and the EU, to agree a monumental trade agreement, but not the UK. Can the Prime Minister say if he chose not to sign up because he thought it was presumably a bad deal, or was the UK left out altogether because this Prime Minister has as weak a reputation on the world stage as he does at home?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if the honourable lady was here for the statement on Monday. I rather assume not. I think what she's describing wasn't a trade deal, so first of all she should get her facts right. And as I explained on Monday, there are lots of different ways that countries will participate in solving international issues. At the same conference that she mentioned, the same summit, we announced a record investment to the Green Climate Fund. It is the single biggest investment by this country to help with international climate finance, and it was warmly welcomed by countries at the summit who can see that the UK is taking a leadership role and helping countries adapt and mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we were hit by the devastating news that all Wilko stores would be closing, meaning the loss of 12,500 jobs. And Bassetlaw and Worksop are the home of Wilko's HQ and a distribution centre with 1,500 jobs set to go. But Wilko has been mismanaged for years. And in the last decade, over 77 million has been paid out to shareholders. And recently, the HQ was sold for 48 million before being leased back. So can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents and all those nationally affected by the demise of Wilko that he and the government will do everything in their power to help support people into jobs and make sure their redundancies and pensions are protected, and we will take whatever action is available to us to hold the ownership to account?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend knows, some of the topics that he raised will be commercial matters for the company, but I do know that this is a concerning time for workers at Wilko. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is keeping close to developments, and we have already started supporting those who have been made redundant, and we stand ready to support others to the fullest of our abilities.
Lillian Greenwood.
The head of the Army, General Sir Patrick Sanders, has said...
Well, interesting there that we had Brendan Clark-Smith, of course, who spoke to us here on GB News yesterday, the Bassetlaw MP, on Wilko, with his observation paralleling that of the GMB, that there had been alleged mismanagement in terms of the company and the shops, of course, with the 12,500 staff members now facing redundancy. But we have the second PMQs of this parliamentary session, and we have in the studio to award their points, or take away points, maybe even, Dennis McShane, former Labour Minister for Europe and Conservative MP for Rayleigh and Wickford, Mark Francois, obviously a member too of many Commons committees. I thought it was a bit flat.
Very flat. The only sparky line was the new Keir Starmer insult of Paul
Inaction man.
Inaction.
That's about the only thing I wrote down, yeah.
There was a change from Captain Hindsight from the other side. I like the question about artificial intelligence. I must say, Mark, I thought a bit of sort of submitting MPs to artificial intelligence help might liven up PMQs.
Well, instead of the whips writing the questions for them.
I think the whips have been trying to do that for years, actually, Dennis. But, I mean, as I said, I scored that... if I'm trying to be as objective as possible, I scored that as a no-score draw. I don't think there was a sort of killer line on either side, really. In some ways, the most interesting answer was to a backbench question from the Labour Party about the triple lock, where the Prime Minister appeared to me to give a very emphatic answer.
And it took Stephen Flynn from the Scottish Nationals to actually raise the issue at all.
I mean, the SNP are in a bit of a... they're having a torrid time at the moment, so he sort of kicked it off. But in response to a Labour backbench question about 15 minutes later, the Prime Minister said, I wrote it down, the government is committed to the triple lock. So I think that's fairly emphatic, really. And I think that's one of the biggest things that came out of PMQ.
But they say they're committed, but it doesn't mean that they might not suspend it for 1 year. Or
tinker with it, yeah.
Well, I think that's fairly emphatic wording from the Prime Minister, but, you know, let's see what happens in the budget. But, I mean, that you know, he was accused of dodging it in reply to the SNP spokesman. But I think in response to that Labour backbencher, he gave a pretty clear answer to me.
Yeah, Stephen Flynn saying we didn't get a yes was his response.
Yeah, but then, as I say, another Labour backbencher, forgive me, and he said the government is...
But interesting point, because you observed very early on, don't go in on foreign affairs matters in terms of your attack lines. Perhaps if the Labour leader had gone in on triple lock, it might have had more impact, although, of course, he's got the problem of Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader, having said, well, you know, we're not committed.
That's probably why he didn't, because he must have known what was coming.
Yeah, it's an interesting example, though, how Prime Minister's questions, 30 minutes or so, and if you worry, and more than one MP, and from all sides, as Mark said, gets up and says, but what about the triple lock? To begin with, I think Mr Sunak was wriggling and ducking and diving because the Treasury hate it and would like to get rid of it. But at the end, he just had to sort of almost swear on his mother's milk that, yes, the Tories would keep it.
And why did you say, I think you said that starting with foreign policy was going down a black hole?
Lose the room, yeah.
Just generally foreign policy in Prime Minister's questions, unless there's an absolutely outrageous example, invasion of Ukraine or some
Isn't a possible spying at Westminster?
No, I think that is complete and utter drivel. If you want to know about Chinese influence, look at all the retired civil servants, ministers of all parties and bigwigs from England who sit on Chinese boards. They give all the information that's possible about English politics.
The commercial intelligence.
A young boy, a young researcher, I'm afraid, pillaring him. Good newspaper headline, but not very realistic.
Right, Mark, I know you're looking at this in more detail, but was it the fact that the Speaker warned the Chamber off this earlier in the week?
Well, I mean, I think the Speaker was quite right. You know, he did what you would expect him to do. He reinforced the legal position. I mean, I just think Starmer's tactics were a bit odd today. I mean, Dennis and I have been in the Chamber, you know, many times. Generally, the most effective attack from a leader of the opposition is where you hammer on one issue. You get up to 6 goes at it, and your backbenchers then all row in behind you. You know, they follow the leader's lead.
And they were pretty subdued today, both sides, weren't they?
It was sort of low octane today.
But Starmer seemed to want to cram 5 issues into one sentence.
This is where I think he went wrong. Now, I mean, there's another way of looking at it, which is, you know, you start on one subject and then you switch fire very quickly and you try and catch the Prime Minister off guard, you know, and flicking through his folder. But if that was the intention today, it didn't work. You know, Rishi was ready for him. Generally, I say, as a rule of thumb, it works best when the leader of the opposition hammers one subject, and for whatever reason, Starmer didn't do that. I think Dennis is right. The reason he didn't dare raise the triple lock is because of what Angela Rayner said a couple of days ago, and Rishi would have, you know, rammed that down his throat.
No, we've discussed...
Well, very simply, look, I saw the last year of John Major's government, the last year of Gordon Brown's government. It's a wretched time for the government, and actually the opposition doesn't, at the start of that last year, come running out, scoring lots of runs. You've got to get a feel of where politics will be. We've got to go through the party conferences, and I think probably the start of next year, the first Prime Minister's Questions of 2024, election year, that's when it's going to get tasty.
Right, so a few defensive strokes don't hit for the boundary quite yet. Yeah.
Exactly.
While you're here, Mark, we discussed foreign affairs. However, there may be some interest in foreign affairs later, because you are going to raise this issue of Tobias Ellwood and what's been described as his Afghanistan tourist video.
Right. There's a meeting of the Defence Committee this afternoon to discuss that, but we all agreed we would not comment publicly, because, to be fair, we need to give Tobias a chance to put his side of the story, which we haven't heard yet. That really is the purpose of the meeting. Perhaps we can say something after that, but, you know, in terms of due process, I think it's fair to hear from him first.
But you can say he will be at that committee and he will be questioned.
We are going to have a discussion with him in the room. He'll have an opportunity to explain to everybody why he did what he did. But I think beyond that, it's not.
You did say you had no confidence in him, though, didn't you, earlier in the summer?
Well, a motion has been tabled, but that is public. But I think, to be fair to him, we should wait for 2 o'clock to hear what he's got to say.
Okay.
I'm not going to try and preface that discussion.
Anyway, you've scored no score draw, 0-0?
I think at the end of the day, if I'm trying to be as objective as possible, it was a no-score draw.
Yeah, it's like a couple of Chelsea matches I've watched already. God, boring, 0-0, nothing really happening.
Not even an own goal.
I genuinely think, you know, these things have got their own rhythms, and it'll take a little bit of time before the parties are into also what they really want to say to win voters at the next.
Well, look, for those who weren't with us earlier, Dennis and I agreed on 2 things earlier on. So to continue the footballing analogy, that is a McShane-Francois hat-trick, and who would have predicted that?
Well, there we go. Yeah. On that sporting note, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed, and we shall see you soon. And of course, we'll get the latest on that Foreign Affairs Committee as well.
Defence Committee.
Defence Committee, I beg your pardon. Yeah.
Plenty more still to come. You're with the Live Desk here on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities.
especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, The People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back to the live desk on GB News. So what did you make of Prime Minister's questions? The consensus here was it was all a bit dull, to be honest, with Rishi Sunak questioned on Chinese espionage, Daniel Khalif escaping from prison and the triple lock on pensions. But did Sir Keir Starmer land any punches?
Well, let's cross to Westminster and speak to our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, Inaction Man was the main hit on Rishi Sunak. We didn't get Captain Hindsight coming back the other way. But speaking of inaction, I mean, the backbenchers didn't really take fire on it. It was all a bit dull.
It did all feel a bit dull. I very much agree with both you and your panel. It was all just a bit flat. It felt like more of the same. Keir Starmer laid into Rishi Sunak for being Inaction Man, which is a new name, but it's a theme which he's touched on many, many times before. We had Rishi Sunak having a go at the Corbyn government, which gets more tiresome week after week, and you don't even think that his own backbenchers are really behind him with that anymore. Keir Starmer has done such a comprehensive job of washing his hands of Jeremy Corbyn and all of his allies in the last year that those insults just don't really hit home anymore. I agree that the fieriest moment really of the whole thing was when the leader of the SNP stood up and asked about the triple lock. Pretty astonishing that Keir Starmer didn't ask about that, given what a mess the Tories have been over whether or not they're going to stick with the triple lock as it is or tinker around the edges in order to save the Treasury a lot of money. It was quite interesting as well that the SNP leader had a go at both Labour and the Tories. We know that the SNP is in a lot of trouble at the moment and they are very, very worried about the Labour resurgence in Scotland, particularly in light of the Rutherglen by-election next month. So it was the SNP that was really the winner for me there. Otherwise, all a little bit flat. Not what you're expecting 1 year out from a general election.
Yeah, and could it be that Labour couldn't go in the attack line on triple lock because of what Angela Rayner, the deputy leader, said to reporters up at Liverpool, indicating that Labour weren't exactly wedded to it?
Well, yeah, exactly. I think that was the problem for Labour. Keir Starmer couldn't really go in too hard, given what his deputy had said. Generally, we've seen Labour quite a lot refusing to go down too hard on Tory policies, because at this point, Labour really is the government in waiting, and it wants to tread very, very carefully now, because it knows that it will be held just next year, probably, to any promises that it makes at the moment. So every time you hear a Labour shadow minister being questioned, it was Wes Streeting this morning, Keir Starmer today, they talk about their fully costed manifesto will be with us soon, somewhere down the line, but right now they won't quite commit to anything. And of course, the triple lock is really very expensive for any government and getting more expensive by the year.
Olivia, there was a suggestion that, and we were talking about this in the studio, that Sir Keir Starmer used somewhat of a scattergun approach. That was his tactic, trying to cram in lots of issues into a sentence, which didn't really seem to work.
Yeah, I completely agree with your guess. It did seem like it just didn't work as a tactic. Normally, Keir Starmer is very, very good, actually. You see his lawyerly side coming out of doing sort of forensic analysis of Rishi Sunak's answers. He goes in on one topic and then asks 5 follow-up questions, really putting Rishi Sunak on the spot. He didn't do that today. He went all out and about with a scattergun approach, as you call it. And if he was trying to put Rishi Sunak on the spot, it didn't really work. Rishi Sunak, for all his faults, is certainly a very well-prepared politician. I could see him in the chamber with his folder all colour-coded, everything highlighted, and he was absolutely ready for everything that Keir Starmer threw at him. It'll be really interesting to see whether Starmer goes back to his usual tactic next week.
And one of those sections on the file, the biggest section perhaps on China, despite that warning from the Speaker earlier in the week, you know, not to touch it because of clearly of ongoing legal issues, but they did go on what the Foreign Secretary may have actually raised in China. But for the moment, we'll have to leave it there. Olivia, thank you for that. And indications that we've still got others trying to get into the picture politically. Coming up, Kim Jong-un and his historic trip to Russia will have the very latest after he's been meeting Putin.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. After a fine but chilly start for some of us this morning, we are going to see some wet and windy weather arriving in the northwest. Meanwhile, most places staying dry and sunny. That's because high pressure is dominating the picture across the UK at the moment, though there is this low waiting out in the Atlantic with its associated fronts. As we look through this afternoon then across much of England and Wales, plenty of fine sunny weather, though watch out for a few showers developing towards the southeast. Then we have some clouds, some rain and strong winds pushing in across parts of Northern Ireland and into western Scotland this afternoon. We are going to see temperatures a little bit lower than recent days, but still getting to highs of around 22, perhaps 23 Celsius in the south. A bit cooler further north and feeling cooler as the wet and windy weather sweeps in. That rain then is going to push its way eastwards and southwards as we go overnight, and so through the early hours of Thursday morning likely to have some heavy persistent rain across parts of northern England and into North Wales too. Blustery showers across parts of Scotland and the winds keeping temperatures from dropping too low here. A relatively warm night towards the south. As we start Thursday then, a cloudy, wet picture across parts of northern England and much of Wales, and staying this way through much of the day as that front doesn't go anywhere particularly fast. Further north across Scotland, plenty of blustery showers with the risk of coastal gales, drier, sunnier towards the south, and here it's also going to be relatively warm with temperatures likely to be a touch higher than today, getting into the mid-20s.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock and you're with the live desk here on GB News. Coming up this Wednesday lunchtime.
In action, man. Sir Keir Starmer attacks Rishi Sunak at PMQs over escaped prisoners and Chinese spies. But the Prime Minister says he's committed to that pensions triple lock.
Kim Jong-un heads back to North Korea after pledging his loyalty to Vladimir Putin in the so-called fight against imperialism, praising the Russian leader for fighting a sacred war. But what could be the consequences of this historic meeting?
More than 5,000 dead, another 10,000 still missing as more bodies wash up on the beaches of Libya. After a devastating flood, the British Red Cross launches an aid effort. Can rescuers access the fragmented state?
Plus, what a source, as Rick Stein charges £2 for a sachet. £2? At his fish and chip shop in Cornwall, consumer groups point out that buying a bottle at the supermarket works out at just 12.5 pence a portion. So is one source just a bit too rich? First, the latest headlines with Lisa.
Good afternoon. It's just after 1 o'clock. I'm Lisa Hartle in the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer accuses the Prime Minister of failing the country during a heated Prime Minister's questions. He also attacked Rishi Sunak's record on the criminal justice system, immigration and security. It follows the escape of terror suspect Daniel Califf and the China spy scandal. Sir Keir says the PM can't be trusted to protect the country. Rishi Sunak hit back, accusing the opposition leader of being a conviction-free leader.
Probation, prison, schools, China. Yet again, inaction man fails to heed the warnings and then blames everyone else for the consequences. He's failing to stop terrorists strolling out of prison, failing to guard Britain against hostile actors. He's completely failing to stop the boats. How can anyone trust him to protect the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about trust, he talks about action. Just today, this government is taking action to reform defective EU laws to unlock over 100,000 homes. boosting our economy, supporting jobs and ensuring that we can realise the aspirations of homeowners. It is typical of the principles-free, conviction-free type of leadership that he offers. Flip-flopping from being a builder to a blocker. Mr. Speaker, the British public can't trust a word he says.
Meanwhile, the Shadow Environment Secretary says nothing represents 13 years of Conservative failure more geographically than the sight of stinking toxic sewage pouring into our rivers, lakes and seas. Steve Reid says Tories cut back on monitoring the water companies, but the government says they are cleaning up the mess that Labour left.
The Conservatives cut the Environment Agency's budget in half. That led to drastic cuts in monitoring, enforcement and prosecution. And that led to a drastic increase in illegal discharges, trashing nature, damaging tourism and putting kids' health at risk. This government are up to their necks in a sewage crisis of their own making.
The Chancellor says the government is sticking to its plan to halve inflation as the economy shrunk by 0.5% in July. Jeremy Hunt remains confident about the future, saying the country quickly recovered from the pandemic and is growing faster than countries like Germany and Italy in the long term. But Labour says it's a failing of the government. A man has been arrested after an 11-year-old girl and 2 men were injured by an American XL bully crossbreed. A warning: the following footage includes graphic images. Footage emerged on social media of the attack in Birmingham on Saturday. West Midlands police say the 60-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of possessing a dog dangerously out of control. The Conservatives have dropped 2 potential candidates to become MPs after the security service warned they could be spies for China. It comes after a parliamentary researcher was arrested in March under the Official Secrets Act. The Times newspaper says MI5 advised the Tory party in 2021 and 2022 that 2 potential candidates should not be considered. The Conservative Party says it'll always act on advice from credible security sources. A top medic says the NHS is not sufficiently resilient ahead of winter. Dr. Adrian Boyle, who's a president of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, says last winter was one of the worst on record for the NHS. He fears the health service could face a similar situation this winter, with 7.6 million people still on the waiting list in England. But the government says it recognises the pressures and will meet with health ministers to address them. England's local road maintenance has hit a 4-year low. Just over 1,000 miles of roads were resurfaced in the previous financial year. Surface redressing, a cost-effective method of road maintenance, also dropped by 34%. The RAC estimates it would cost £14 billion to fix local road potholes in England and Wales, but the government says it increased the pothole fund to £700 million for this year. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Mark and Pip.
And welcome back to the Live Desk. So, no Captain Hindsight this week, but Inaction Man made an appearance at PMQs. Sir Keir Starmer making that charge against Rishi Sunak over escaped prisoners and Chinese spying.
But it was Sir Keir himself who failed to act on the pensions triple lock, leaving it to the SNP to question the Prime Minister. It all failed to rally the troops on either side of the House. And GB News' political correspondent Olivia Utley joins us now. A bit of a lacklustre PMQs then, Olivia. In here, we thought it was a bit of a 0-0 draw, to be honest.
I absolutely agree with both you and your guests. It did feel a little bit lacklustre. I thought that in this new parliamentary term, gearing up to an election, possibly at the beginning of next year, possibly at the end of next year, we'd be seeing lots and lots of energy in PMQs. But actually, I felt like this was sort of more of the same. Inaction Man was a new and pretty effective insult from Keir Starmer to Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak went with his old flip-flopping. He even talked about Keir Starmer standing by Jeremy Corbyn in the last election. This jibe has gone down worse and worse every week, really, and now it feels like a bit of a lead balloon. Keir Starmer has worked very hard over his time as Labour leader to sort of wash his hands of Jeremy Corbyn and all of his allies, so that doesn't really land. That said, Keir Starmer didn't do a great job either. He had a sort of scattergun approach. He talked about 6 different topics over the course of his 6 questions. Keir Starmer is normally much better when he is doing his lawyerly thing, if you like, and doing forensic analysis of Rishi Sunak's answers. He's best when he goes in on one topic and then continues to chase up that topic with 5 subsequent questions. He didn't do that today, and I think really that's what resulted in this pretty flat PMQs all round.
To raise this question of the triple lock, and then there was a backbench Labour question as well. And we had from the Prime Minister, we are committed to the triple lock, but of course many of those MPs saying, well, that's not exactly a yes in terms of defending the triple lock as it is now.
Well, absolutely. There's been a lot of controversy at the moment around the triple lock. The government is desperately looking for some sort of loophole in the pensions triple lock because it is proving exceptionally expensive for the Treasury. It's a noose around the Treasury's neck. There is talk, although it sounded as though the pensions minister refuted it this morning, that the government might tinker with the way that they calculate how the triple lock works in order to save the Treasury £630 million. They normally calculate it by average wages and include bonuses in wages. If you don't include bonuses, that figure goes down from 8.5% to 7.6%, saving the Treasury £630 million. But of course, there's been a lot of criticism for the government that they would be breaking their promise if they did that. Triple lock is a really interesting subject because it is very controversial across the board. And I was actually in London this morning talking to some voters about what they made of it. Here's what they had to say.
I think it is fair enough, actually. I do. I have to be honest with you. I believe that's something we desperately need, some of us. And not myself personally, but I do know people who do. I need it to a lesser extent, shall we say, than they do. That's what I mean.
I have a sister who's 80, and she has to say the triple lock has been incredible, and she couldn't believe, and it's made all the difference to her.
I don't think so, but I'm a pensioner, so I would like to see it sticking, you know. But I think in all fairness to the younger people, I think we should have to bear some of the burden as well.
Being a pensioner, yes, I think it is. I think the pensions should be raised. The triple lock has worked for many years, and I think it should continue.
Yes, I think the pensions triple lock should be scrapped. I started receiving my pension last year, and I was amazed by how much I got, and it's going up again. And well, it's the young people who are struggling and not so much the pensioners.
No, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think if you're giving across-the-board help to any particular group of people, it shouldn't be pensioners. I think it should be definitely young people or people starting off with a family. So, you know, sort out the housing crisis, make it easier for young people.
So there's a bit of a mixed reaction in Clapham this morning. It'll be really interesting to see how the Conservatives and Labour, for that matter, handle this issue as we get closer to the election.
OK, Olivia Utley, thank you for that. Let's talk to Rebecca O'Connor, who is the Director of Public Affairs at PensionBee and can join us on GB News now. Good afternoon to you, Rebecca. Some people are suggesting, and we heard a cross-section of views there, that this is about fairness between the younger and older generation. And at the moment, it is far too swayed towards pensioners.
I think when considering this question, we have to remember that we're all future pensioners. And although it is being portrayed as an issue of intergenerational fairness or unfairness, depending on your point of view, one day I'm going to get the state pension. And I have been working and planning my retirement on the basis of receiving the state pension. So to undo it now would, potentially leave a nasty legacy for decades for future pensioners. So, it would affect today's 18-year-olds as much as it's going to affect today's 70-year-olds.
But the way it's calculated now, isn't it all getting a bit out of control?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely costly. And when the triple lock was first introduced, it was introduced to sort of get pensioners' incomes up to a satisfactory level. Some argue that's now happened. Some think we're still a little bit further to go on that path. But it is very costly. There are other levers that the government can pull, but perhaps it's worth considering review and reform to increase the state pension by earnings or inflation and remove the 2.5% backstop. That's one course of action the government could take. Of course, if that happened, we would have to be prepared to accept that sometimes the state pension wouldn't rise at all in those years where inflation was low or earnings were low.
Yeah.
So it's really what we're prepared to accept.
And we remember, of course, Gordon Brown raising the pension by, I think, 75 pence a week. I mean, the issue is, of course, that the triple lock or the state pension is effectively a contract with people. They've paid their national insurance over the years to actually receive that. So I guess that's the issue of trust, as you would do with an occupational pension scheme. If you sign a contract, that has to be honoured.
Yeah, I mean, over many years, we've seen lots of changes to the state pension. We saw the women's state pension age rise from 60 to 65 and now 66, for instance. That caused many issues because, again, that was this issue of there was an expectation throughout working life that someone would have something and then they didn't get it at the point that they were hoping to get it. Now, the state pension is a benefit. It's not about how much you put in. I think, sometimes there's a little lack of understanding around that. The government can change the triple lock. But clearly, we go forth through life with an expectation that we're going to get something. And you're right, there is a social contract there that needs to be handled very, very carefully.
And interestingly, this does seem like an issue that both Labour and the Tories might actually agree on, in that it needs some sort of reform.
Yeah, but also interestingly, they both feel very, very reluctant to be the ones to go above the parapet and say that, knowing that it's a huge voter issue. People do rely on the state pension, even those that have some private savings on top rely on it for most of their pension income. So it's going to be very difficult, I think, to make that decision.
Is that a key issue, that obviously you represent the private occupational pensions industry, personal pensions and so on, and perhaps our provision is slightly better than elsewhere in Europe on that scale, but our state pension is still well below what's offered elsewhere in Europe?
Yeah, it is still low relative to other countries. Our private pension provision is good, but of course that is changing too as we move away from final salary, defined benefit schemes, and more people retiring with defined contribution or pot of money schemes where the amount that you get at the end depends on how much you put in yourself. And those pensions, although we are saving into them in generally more and more, they are actually, with the minimum contributions of 8%, not providing enough really to generate a moderate living standard in retirement for most people, even with the state pension included. So if you take the state pension out of the equation or even reduce it slightly, the amount needed from a private pot goes quite dramatically.
Yeah.
Really interesting to talk to you this afternoon, Rebecca. Rebecca O'Connor there, Director of Public Affairs at PensionBee.
Now, who said this? We will be together in the fight against imperialism. Well, the words of Kim Jong-un on the station platform, pledging his support for Putin and the war against the West during that visit to the Vostochny Cosmodrome in southeastern Russia.
The pair also sat down for an official lunch before Kim Jong-un boarded his armoured train back to Pyongyang, with the pair toasting each other's health and the friendship between their two countries. Oh, it all sounds so romantic, doesn't it? Let's get the thoughts now of Kia Giles from the Russia and Eurasia programme at Chatham House. So, how worried should the rest of the world be then about these rogue states that seem to have agreed on quite a few things?
Well, there's no doubt it's bad news because, yes, they each have something that the other wants, and each of those things is bad news for everybody else. In fact, if one of the key outcomes from this meeting is likely to be Russia being able to prosecute its war against Ukraine, to try to rebuild the Russian Empire even more efficiently, which is what makes for that grim irony in them saying they stand together against imperialism. That's exactly what they're standing for by supporting Russia. But even at the other end of the country, at the other end of Russia in the Far East, anything that Russia does to help North Korea is bad news for North Korea's neighbours, South Korea, Japan, who already live in a rough neighbourhood. Not just Russia to deal with, but also North Korea, China as well. In fact, it is this coalition of rogue states that seem to be getting together to help each other out. And it's a coalition of people who want to bring the world crashing down and then dance on the ruins.
Is there another analysis, however, and that is that we still have no detail on any kind of arms deal. They were at the Cosmodrome, and basically they talked about satellites, and maybe that's all that Russia is prepared to give North Korea, is a bit of satellite technology. I think both their recent launches failed, and perhaps, you know, he's going to get some rather out-of-date munitions in return for that.
There are a lot of maybes. We won't know the fine detail of what exactly has been agreed. Not soon, possibly not ever, unless we have details of that fine, very closely held intelligence of what's actually happening between the two countries, as opposed to what's been publicized. But in terms of what Russia needs, it's those outdated munitions that Russia has been lacking. They've been burning through their own old Cold War stocks of dumb shells, and North Korea is a source for them. Of course, in that respect, Russia's much the same as the coalition backing Ukraine. Everybody's casting around for more weapons to keep Ukraine in the fight, as well as Russia looking for old munitions to keep pummeling Ukraine with its artillery.
We're just looking at pictures now of the meeting, and we know they toasted each other with all these very warm, lovely words. But are they not two leaders who are, or particularly Putin, he's very, very desperate?
There was once upon a time when Putin would have used warm, lovely words about Western countries, about countries with whom he could have constructive relations. Of course, he's burned those bridges, so he has to look for his friends where he can actually find them. And yes, it is very disturbing. People are talking about an alliance between these two countries. They don't need to go that far to cause a problem simply by cooperating together against the rest of the world. Russia was actually one of the key supporters of sanctions against North Korea to try to prevent it developing nuclear weapons. If that evaporates, the world becomes a much more dangerous place.
Where does China fit in all this? Because we understand that the Chinese foreign minister will be meeting Sergei Lavrov from Russia, and clearly there have been discussions with Putin as well, the deputy premier of China. Traditionally, they've sort of tried to sit on North Korea a little bit, haven't they? Because they see it effectively as a bit of a difficult local problem.
That's correct, sitting on North Korea, but also at the moment sitting on the fence, much in the same way as China is doing in this dispute between Russia and Ukraine, backed by the West. They are using very neutral language about this meeting. They're talking about their constructive relations with North Korea itself. They're not actually stepping in to say anything that is even remotely critical about the meeting. And yes, this news of the foreign ministers meeting, China and Russia, has come during the meeting between Putin and Kim. We shouldn't read too much into the timing, perhaps, but it'll be interesting to see what comes out of those discussions in Moscow later with regard to the course of the war on Ukraine overall.
And it will be interesting as well to see how North Korea itself reports on this trip by their leader.
That's absolutely right. Yes, North Korean domestic reporting for its own population, telling them what's going on in the outside world and even in their own country is sometimes very far removed from what's actually happened, both in reality and in time. So how this is going to play at home, we still don't know.
OK, well, it is going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few weeks and months. Kia Giles from the Russia and Eurasia programme at Chatham House, thank you for your analysis.
Coming up, we'll have the latest on the floods and devastation in Libya, with another 10,000 still missing, bodies being washed up, we're being told, on the beaches. What can the international aid effort do in a fractured state? More on that in a moment.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. After a fine but chilly start for some of us this morning, we are going to see some wet and windy weather arriving in the northwest. Meanwhile, most places staying dry and sunny. That's because high pressure is dominating the picture across the UK at the moment, though there is this low waiting out in the Atlantic with its associated fronts. As we look through this afternoon then, across much of England and Wales, plenty of fine sunny weather, though watch out for a few showers developing towards the southeast. Then we have some clouds, some rain and strong winds pushing in across parts of Northern Ireland and into western Scotland this afternoon. We are going to see temperatures a little bit lower than recent days, but still getting to highs of around 22, perhaps 23 Celsius in the south. A bit cooler further north and feeling cooler as the wet and windy weather sweeps in. That rain then is going to push its way eastwards and southwards as as we go overnight. And so through the early hours of Thursday morning, likely to have some heavy persistent rain across parts of northern England and into North Wales too. Blustery showers across parts of Scotland, and the winds keeping temperatures from dropping too low here. A relatively warm night towards the south. As we start Thursday then, a cloudy, wet picture across parts of northern England and much of Wales, and staying this way through much of the day as that front doesn't go anywhere particularly fast. Further north across Scotland, plenty of blustery showers with the risk of coastal gales. Drier, sunnier towards the south, and here it's also going to be relatively warm, with temperatures likely to be a touch higher than today, getting into the mid-20s.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Now, emergency workers in Libya have so far recovered more than 5,300 bodies. That number expected to maybe even double after the catastrophic tsunami flood which swept through the eastern coast of the city of Derna.
Thousands of people are still missing, with bodies, sometimes of whole families, who were washed away. Those bodies washing up on beaches along the waterfront. Multiple dams have burst after torrential storms, flooding entire neighbourhoods and sweeping people out into the Mediterranean.
Now, the International Organization for Migration says 30,000 have been displaced by the disaster, but the political fracturing of Libya, this city being in the east, is complicating any of the international aid or rescue efforts. Well, let's speak now to Ahmed Bayram, who's Media and Communications Advisor, at the Norwegian Refugee Council, involved in that relief effort. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And this political complication means it's difficult to assess who you contact to get the aid to the right place.
Good evening. I mean, not always quite so. We have been operating in that area, in that vicinity, in Benghazi and other eastern, villages and towns in Libya since 2017. So for us, we have been navigating that all over these years, and we have been able to get aid to people who need it when we can. I think the main problem now that I've been talking about is around the infrastructure damage. There is agreement that help needs to get in as soon as we can. I mean, body bags are not available for rescue workers, and that's because of the infrastructure damage, because of the 2 dams that collapsed and overwhelmed the whole area. And the other reason being the very low toolbox resources that these rescue workers have. Appealing for body bags while bodies are scattered around the town of Derna can give you a glimpse of the sheer suffering and the big challenge that these search and rescue workers are facing.
And we are just looking at some pictures, but it's right, isn't it, that whole families were swept away?
Yes, indeed, and it's very tragic. Families who lost, entire families, as you say, were lost. Some family members still waiting to hear a word from their relatives. There's no power, there's no electricity, there's no water, there's no connection, there's no internet. The number of missing, is now at 10,000. Anything that rescue workers can pull out alive would be a miracle. This is the 3rd day, and yeah, it is going to be a huge, a large death, or unfortunately, that we're looking at.
We're being told the Italian government is just sending 2 C-130 military aircraft loaded with personnel and water risk experts as well, because disease now, of course, may be one of the problems. But they've also got a naval ship, the San Giorgio, already departed for Derna with logistical help on board. But is part of the problem that in terms of dealing with administration, Tripoli, which is the government that Western powers deal with, is disconnected, if you like, from this area?
That is the reality of the political status quo, on which I can't, comment. However, we know that there is coordination that is happening through the UN bodies, and that should help, make all these connections. I haven't seen anything that would, as of now, obstruct the delivery of aid to any area. Again, this is a political question. For us, what matters is to get these shipments in, and to get these ships in, the only way into Derna, as of now, is through a narrow southern corridor, and then there's the sea. As you said, there might be some infections, infestations, and dead bodies are all scattered all around town. There's some bodies that are washing up on the coast. It's very harrowing, and I think now is the time to put politics aside and bring Libya back on the agenda.
Do you think, actually, on that note, it could bring the two sides together in dealing with such a huge humanitarian disaster?
Definitely, we definitely are calling for humanitarian, for the humanitarian needs to overshadow everything else. These are people that are stranded. We are, a few months away from, not even months, a few weeks away from winter proper. The spread of disease is a real risk. The mental toll that this, loss will take on children and on their families is going to be huge. And on top of that, expect another wave of displacement, another wave of massive displacement. You mentioned the numbers; they're probably as high as 60,000 as we read, and it's going to be very, very harsh times ahead for the people of Libya.
I mean, how many years could this set Libya back, a place that's been in crisis for over 10 years now?
Yes, definitely. We've learned that from other tragedies in the Middle East and North Africa recently, Morocco, and before that, Syria and Turkey. These populations, they were not even, back on their feet. They were not even making that full recovery in terms of humanitarian needs and in terms of their lives and livelihoods. This is going to be as bad as it's going to take a lot, bring back a lot of bad memories, dark memories for the people of Libya. And that's why we need urgent support. That's why we need international community to come together and pledge for the people of Libya.
Ahmed, thank you very much indeed for updating us and bringing us your story there. Just to let you know, the British Red Cross has launched an international aid effort as well. We'll be trying to update you on that. But let's get the latest news headlines now with Lisa.
It's just after 1:30. I'm Lisa Hartle in the GB newsroom. We start with some breaking news in the last few minutes. The former chief financial officer and 3 others from the collapsed bakery Patisserie Valerie have been charged with conspiracy to defraud. We'll bring you more on this as we get it. Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Prime Minister of failing the country during a heated Prime Minister's questions. He also attacked Rishi Sunak's record on the criminal justice system, immigration and security. It follows the escape of terror suspect Daniel Khalif and the China spy scandal. Sir Keir says the PM can't be trusted to protect the country. Rishi Sunak hit back, accusing the opposition leader of being a conviction-free leader. Meanwhile, the Shadow Environment Secretary says nothing represents 13 years of Conservative failure more graphically than the sight of the stinking, toxic sewage pouring into our rivers, lakes and seas. Steve Reid says Tories cut back on monitoring the water companies, but the government says they are cleaning up the mess that Labour left. The Chancellor says the government is sticking to its plan to halve inflation as the economy shrunk by 0.5% in July. Jeremy Hunt remains confident about the future, saying the country quickly recovered from the pandemic and is growing faster than countries like Germany and Italy in the long term. But Labour says it's a failing of the government. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2466 and 1.1616 euros. The price of gold is £1,533 and 12 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,506 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Now, latest snapshot of the economy, and it shrank by 0.5%, 0.5% in July, according to the Office of National Statistics. But it's added that the broader picture looking more positive, with services, production, construction sectors between March and June looking a bit healthier.
One sector that has been growing is car production, particularly the manufacturing of electric vehicles, or EVs. But are they really the key to clean emissions-free motoring? Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, has this special report from Ellesmere Port.
They've made cars at Ellesmere Port since the early 60s. This Cheshire plant's now leading the charge towards emissions-free motoring, the first UK factory for electric vehicles only. This repurposed facility will make 50,000 electric vans a year, the first of which just rolled off the production line. They'll be sold under the Vauxhall, Fiat, Citroën and Peugeot brands, all owned by the global conglomerate Stellantis. Often threatened with closure, Ellesmere Port now looks secure.
Firstly, fantastically flexible and resilient workforce here, so that's an absolute key part of it, and a real testament to them driving down the costs of production. And the second part is that Vauxhall is the market leader on electric commercial vehicle sales, over 30% market share. Fantastic product range, and again, it just shows the confidence we've got in that product range to build more here.
Workers understand to their fingertips what this new investment means.
It's a big boost to the local economy. A lot of other big companies have been relocated from Ellesmere Port over the years, and the fact that Stellantis have felt that they can keep the factory here, it's just a massive boost for everyone.
EV production is complex, as plant manager Diane Miller explains. It relies on these heavy battery units, expensive to transport. The UK has only one battery-making gigafactory, which is Chinese-owned. And for now, power units used at Ellesmere Port will be shipped from China.
The modules are not made in the UK, yes, they come from China, but we put them together into the battery pack to what the customer would effectively see as the battery pack. So we have 22 people working doing that, putting 18 of the modules that come from China together, connecting them together, testing them, putting them in the safe, secure area, and that's how we produce the battery pack.
EVs now make up 40% of UK car production. Sales of new petrol and diesel vehicles are set to be banned in Britain from 2030. But electric vehicles need huge amounts of lithium, cobalt and copper, commodities often found in difficult parts of the world. They're also expensive and with a relatively short lifespan. And given the UK's patchy charging network, Will the 2030 ban really happen?
We're just not going to have the infrastructure in place. And if you haven't got the infrastructure, it's not going to work. And I think the second reason is that there are going to be increasing doubts about whether EVs are the right technology. We all agree that we want to get to net zero and have cleaner cities, and that transport's going to be a big part of that. But are EVs the answer? It might be other technologies. We need a little bit longer to find out.
Car makers are betting big on EVs. Stellantis here at Ellesmere Port, with BMW making the new Mini EV at Cowley. But is this the right technology? Much of the car-buying public remains unconvinced. Liam Halligan, GB News, at Ellesmere Port.
Well, let's get more from Liam because we've got other figures out today. Liam here with On the Money. We're looking at figures showing that the economy is down, GDP down 0.5%. However, Kemi Badenoch, the business secretary, saying, well, hold on a minute, exports up 16% on the last year, particularly with the motor manufacturing industry. That's an important thing to remember.
So about 70-odd% of the cars we make in this country are exported. That's one thing. Exports are also up because the UK has been importing an awful lot of liquefied natural gas from the US and then turning it around and selling it on to mainland Europe in order to replace gas that would previously have come from Russia. So they're two big trends in our export industry. But look, on EVs, it's great news, of course, that Stellantis, of the parent company, of Vauxhall, Peugeot, Citroën, Fiat, a lot of other companies, they've invested 100 million quid in Ellesmere Port, a car-making mecca. It's been making cars since the early 60s. And that's great news, because that's secured that factory. That's the first EV-only factory in the UK. And, of course, Kemi Badenoch visited the Cowley plant, the BMW
Minis,
plant in Cowley, where they're going to be making EV Minis. All this is good news. On the other hand, Mark and Pip, increasing numbers of people, both within politics, high up, and within the car industry, high up, but sotto voce for now, not sort of putting their head over the parapet, are questioning and talking to people like me, is this really the right way to go, these EVs? Because they're very heavy, they've got a short lifespan, we need those rare earth minerals for the batteries. I mean, look, hats off to Ellesmere Port, Stellantis, but as I made clear there, the fuel cells that they're using, they're still coming from China. They're sort of wrapping them up and making them into battery packs that they can say this is a...
I think people are quite nervous. I'm due to change my car next year, and I have been genuinely thinking about getting an EV.
Yeah.
But I am really nervous about it.
And you are not
alone,
alone,
thinking,
Pip.
how much is it going to cost me to do all the installation at home? It's...
And there's you, and with huge respect to you, you're going to be a relatively prosperous person. Maybe, you're particularly interested in the environmental cause. There'll be many people to whom none of that applies. They just want to buy the right car or particularly van so they can make a living or so they can get about, particularly if they live in rural areas. And there is a glut now of EVs. A lot of EVs are being produced that aren't being sold. Tesla's in the US, other EVs here in the UK. And so prices are going down. Dealerships are quietly discounting these EVs.
But where do you plug it in? That's the problem.
That as well, because we produce 2/5 of the cars we now produce here in the UK, so hundreds of thousands every year are EVs, up from just 10% back in 2020. So an incredible surge. Yet each new EV we produce that isn't exported, we're not really adding more charging points. That's going very, very slowly. So there is this range anxiety. And I think some of the manufacturers are making it worse because the range they tell you the car is...
Not quite...
It often works out to be a lot shorter in real life.
Yeah. You're back next hour to talk about the bigger figures in the economy because it's all going to feed into what the Bank of England will do next week.
Some growth figures came out this morning. They'll be worth running our GB News slide rule over them, but we'll do that in the next hour.
Which has to become bigger and bigger and bigger. Liam, for the moment, thank you very much.
It is Back British Farming Day, and in fact, PMQs, they were all wearing wheat sheaths on their lapels, the MPs, to mark it. It's an annual campaign.
So we failed miserably, haven't we?
Yeah, I shouldn't have mentioned it, should I? But it is an annual campaign by the National Farmers Union to support the British food and farming sector.
Well, indeed, the Food and Farming Secretary, Therese Coffey, today providing a boost for those farmers with a package of measures to help people buy British and provide farmers with cash flow they need to reinvest in their businesses. Let's get more now with our national reporter, Ellie Costello, and see if she's got the wheat on her... Oh, no, she's actually in a tractor. She's gone one better. What, are you off to plant something, sow something, or dig it up?
Good afternoon, Mark and Pip. Well, I've never sat in the cab of a tractor before, so I just had to get in here, and it is huge. You wouldn't believe it. And I'm now going to try and come down really gracefully because it is Back British Farming Day today. It's a huge day for the agriculture sector, and the message is very, very simple to the British public. It's Back British and support your local farmers. We're here on Childerditch Farms here in Essex, where they farm wheat and barley and oats. These are the most commonly grown crops in Great Britain. We see these in our cereals, in our breads, in our flours. Generally, if you're sat at the breakfast table in Great Britain, your wheat, your oats, your barley would come from a British farm. And I've got one with me right now. This is Ed Ford, who's a partner at Childerditch Farms. Really good to see you, Ed. So the message today is buy British and buy local. And that sounds great, doesn't it? But we are in a cost of living crisis, and it's generally more expensive. So why should people do it?
We are in a cost of living crisis, Ellie, and I fully appreciate that. But when you're buying the best food that you can afford, try and buy British, try and look for that red tractor logo.
Well,
then you know it's come from a sustainable, responsible source, produced in Great Britain by a trusted farmer. What more could you want?
And you've had a really challenging 18 months, haven't you? Paint a picture of what that's been like for you.
So the last 18 months has been pretty crazy, really. Back in March last year, obviously, we had the Ukraine crisis unfolding in front of our eyes. Our prices of inputs doubled and tripled overnight. Costs were just going through the roof, and we couldn't do anything about it. Then we managed to get through that, and then we got into harvest last year, where we hadn't had rain for something like 8 weeks in the run-up to harvest. There was a drought declared. We had wildfires, and it was a very average harvest. But the intense heat, had ruined a lot of the crops. Then we had a very dry autumn again. A wet, cold spring, followed then by a wet harvest that we've just had.
And that wet harvest has actually taken you double the time, hasn't it, to harvest than it usually would because of the rain?
It has. It took us double the time, and we've got some crop here that we harvested, and it's not as gold and as shiny as it should be, and that's because the rain has got to it. And it is what it is. We can't do anything about the weather. We're governed by the weather. It's the biggest factor involved in producing food, and we can't do anything about it.
OK, Ed, really, really good to speak to you. And we'll chat a little bit more in the next hour about the support that the government has been speaking about in PMQs. But Pip and Mark, the NFU had a poll out this morning that actually revealed that after nurses, farmers and the work that they do is the second most respected profession in the United Kingdom. So the respect seems to be there amongst the British public, but they're asking for people to go that one step further, to shop local, to support their local farmers, and to look for that red tractor logo when they're shopping in the supermarket. That means that it's been grown or reared in Great Britain, and it's the best quality and the very best standard, grown by people like Ed. So do, if you can, if you're in the supermarket today, do buy British and do support your local farmer.
We'll be back to you and see how straight the furrow is that you can actually plough with that particular tractor. There was a challenge for you. She'll probably do it now as well.
She will.
Ellie, thank you.
That was a challenge that you laid down for her. Now, Prince William has visited a construction site in West London today to highlight the issue of suicide in the construction industry. During the visit, he raised the crucial need to focus on prevention rather than crisis management when it comes to mental health support.
Well, the visit also coming in the week of World Suicide Prevention, which was the day itself, Sunday, the 10th of September. Let's get more with our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, joining us now from West London. And something that's very close, of course, this mental health issue to the Prince. He's highlighted it for some time before even becoming Prince of Wales.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. It's a cause he's championed for years, really, and there's some really staggering statistics which Kensington Palace have made us aware of today. 2 construction workers take their own life every working day in Great Britain, and the suicide rate amongst construction workers is over 3 times the national average in this country. And as you mentioned, it was World Suicide Prevention Day on Sunday. So Prince William came to the construction site that you can see behind me earlier earlier on to spotlight the need for prevention rather than crisis management when it comes to mental health issues, and that means tackling the problem early before it becomes too late and people are suffering very serious suicidal thoughts. Now, His Royal Highness sat down with construction workers at the site behind me, as well as other people within the industry who make up that supply chain. He also heard from the charity Mates in Mind, which have helped hundreds of construction-related charities since 2017 to really ramp up their mental health provision for their workers. So things like well-being training, also kind of digital mental health support as well. They've got a free confidential text service which is available 24 hours a day for those who need support, getting the right support at the right time. Now, Prince William has spoken openly about his own mental health in the past, particularly the trauma he suffered following the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, and when he was working as an air ambulance pilot in East Anglia. He spoke quite openly, actually, about an incident involving a very gravely ill 10-year-old boy that he had to transport to hospital. He launched the Heads Together initiative with the Princess of Wales and Prince Harry, trying to break the stigma when it comes to mental health. He's also worked on digital innovation with a number of charities and the emergency services as well, with the Blue Lights Together initiative, looking after the mental health of emergency services. Now, as I mentioned, Mates in Mind, the charity Prince William met here today, they've got a text service if you are struggling, so you can text Be a Mates to 85258, and of course you can contact Samaritans. Now, next week Prince William is in New York for the Earthshot Innovation Summit, but he's also expected to visit emergency services at a local firehouse in New York, where he is expected to talk about mental health as well.
OK. Royal correspondent Cameron Walker, thank you for that. And actually, while Cameron was talking, there are pictures of Harry and Meghan that we'll try and bring you in the next hour at the Invictus Games. Of course, both brothers very strong on the issue of mental health.
Yeah, and of course, they had launched that as the famous four that you remember before, well, splitting up like the Beatles did. Coming up, Kim Jong-un has been talking to Putin. So what exactly has he got with him as he's on his armoured train going back to North Korea? Should we be worried?
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. After a fine but chilly start for some of us this morning, we are going to see some wet and windy weather arriving in the northwest. Meanwhile, most places staying dry and sunny. That's because high pressure is dominating the picture across the UK at the moment, though there is this low waiting out in the Atlantic with its associated fronts. As we look through this afternoon then, across much of England and Wales, plenty of fine sunny weather, though watch out for a few showers developing towards the southeast. Then we have some clouds, some rain and strong winds pushing in across parts of Northern Ireland and into western Scotland this afternoon. We are going to see temperatures a little bit lower than recent days, but still getting to highs of around 22, perhaps 23 Celsius in the south. A bit cooler further north and feeling cooler as the wet and windy weather sweeps in. That rain then is going to push its way eastwards and southwards as we go overnight, and so through the early hours of Thursday morning, likely to have some heavy persistent rain across parts of northern England and into North Wales too. Blustery showers across parts of Scotland, and the winds keeping temperatures from dropping too low here. A relatively warm night towards the south. As we start Thursday then, a cloudy, wet picture across parts of northern England and much of Wales, and staying this way through much of the day as that front doesn't go anywhere particularly fast. Further north across Scotland, plenty of blustery showers with the risk of coastal gales. Drier, sunnier towards the south, and here it's also going to be relatively warm, with temperatures likely to be a touch higher than today, getting into the mid-20s.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock and you're with the live desk here on GB News. Coming up this Wednesday afternoon.
Kim Jong-un heads back to Pyongyang after pledging his loyalty to Vladimir Putin with a so-called fight against imperialism, praising the Russian leader in a fight of a sacred war. How worried should the West now be?
In action, man. Sir Keir Starmer attacks Rishi Sunak at PMQs over escaped prisoners and Chinese spies. But the Prime Minister says he is committed to the pensions triple lock.
More than 5,000 dead, another 10,000 still missing. More bodies start to wash up too on the beaches of Libya after the devastating floods. The British Red Cross now launching an aid effort, but can they access the fragmented state?
And would you pay £2 for a sachet of sauce? Because that is what Rick Stein is charging at his fish and chip shop in Cornwall. Consumer groups are pointing out that buying a bottle at the supermarket works out at just 12.5 pence a portion. So is one sauce just a bit too rich? First, let's get all your headlines with Lisa.
Good afternoon, it's 2:01. I'm Lisa Hartle in the GB newsroom. So Keir Starmer has accused the Prime Minister of failing the country during a heated Prime Minister's questions. He also attacked Rishi Sunak's record on the criminal justice system, immigration and security. It follows the escape of terror suspect Daniel Khalif and the China spy scandal. So Keir says the PM can't be trusted to protect the country. Rishi Sunak hit back, accusing the opposition leader of being a conviction-free leader.
Probation, prison, schools, China, yet again inaction man fails to heed the warnings and then blames everyone else for the consequences. He's failing to stop terrorists strolling out of prison, failing to guard Britain against hostile actors. He's completely failing to stop the boats. How can anyone trust him to protect the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about trust, he talks about action. Just today, this government is taking action to reform defective EU laws to unlock over 100,000 homes, boosting our economy, supporting jobs and ensuring that we can realise the aspirations of homeowners. It is typical of the principles-free, conviction-free type of leadership that he offers. Flip-flopping from being a builder to a blocker. Mr. Speaker, the British public can't trust a word he says.
Meanwhile, the Shadow Environment Secretary says nothing represents 13 years of Conservative failure more graphically than the sight of the stinking, toxic sewage pouring into our rivers, lakes and seas. Steve Reid says Tories cut back on monitoring the water companies, but the government says they are cleaning up the mess that Labour left.
The Conservatives cut the Environment Agency's budget in half. That led to drastic cuts in monitoring, enforcement and prosecution. And that led to a drastic increase in illegal discharges, trashing nature, damaging tourism and putting kids' health at risk. This government are up to their necks in a sewage crisis of their own making. Yeah.
The Chancellor says the government is sticking to its plan to halve inflation as the economy shrunk by 0.5% in July. Jeremy Hunt remains confident about the future, saying the country quickly recovered from the pandemic and is growing faster than countries like Germany and Italy in the long term. But Labour says it's a failing of the government. The former chief financial officer and 3 others from the collapsed bakery Patisserie Valerie have been charged with conspiracy to defraud. The Serious Fraud Office says it's charged Christopher Marsh and his wife, along with the financial controller and financial consultant, in relation to the alleged offence. The SFO accused them of conspiring to inflate the cash on the balance sheets and annual reports from 2015 to 2018. They'll appear at Westminster Magistrates Court in October. A man has been arrested after an 11-year-old girl and 2 men were injured by an American XL bully crossbreed. A warning: the following clip contains graphic images. Footage emerged on social media of the attack in Birmingham on Saturday. West Midlands police say the 60-year-old has been arrested on suspicion of possessing a dog dangerously out of control. The Conservatives have dropped 2 potential candidates to become MPs after the security service warned they could be spies for China. It comes after a parliamentary researcher was arrested in March under the Official Secrets Act. The Times newspaper says MI5 advised the Tory party in 2021 and 2022 that 2 potential candidates should not be considered. The Conservative Party says it'll always act on advice from credible security sources. A top medic says the NHS is not sufficiently resilient ahead of winter. Dr Adrian Boyle, who's president of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, says last winter was one of the worst on record for the NHS. He fears the health service could face a similar situation this winter, with 7.6 million people still on the waiting list in England. But the government says it recognises the pressures and will meet with the health ministers to address them. England's local road maintenance has hit a 4-year low. Just over 1,000 miles of roads were resurfaced in the previous financial year. Surface dressing, a cost-effective method of road maintenance, also dropped by 34%. The RAC estimates it would cost £14 billion to fix local road potholes in England and Wales, but the government says it increased the pothole fund to £700 million for this year. This is GB News across the UK on digital radio and TV and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Mark and Pip.
Lisa, thanks very much indeed. So let's reflect on PMQs, where there was no Captain Hindsight this week. But Inaction Man made an appearance. Sir Keir Starmer making that charge against Rishi Sunak over the issue of, well, plenty of things indeed, missing prisoners and also Chinese spies.
But it was Sir Keir himself who failed to act on the pensions triple lock amid the muddled stance taken by everyone on the policy. Instead, one of his backbenchers, Ashley Dalton, challenged the Prime Minister on what the government policy is on the state pension.
I'm still confused on this matter because just yesterday the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions said that the pensions triple lock is not sustainable. The Chancellor's economic advisers have suggested that it is time to review the policy, but Number 10, when questioned, have said they're committed to it. So, Mr. Speaker, which is it?
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to the triple lock. It was this government that introduced the triple lock. She might want to have a word with her own deputy leader, who I don't think provided much clarity on the matter. And remember, Mr. Speaker, I think we all remember when it came to pensions, what we can remember is Gordon Brown's 75p a week increase.
Let's get some analysis then from GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley. Olivia, good afternoon. So Rishi Sunak said in Parliament, in PMQs, that the government is committed to the triple lock. But he didn't exactly say whether that would continue beyond the next election, did he?
Well, no, he didn't, and that is pretty significant. For quite a few years now, the Conservatives have been desperately trying to find some sort of loophole in the triple lock. It's become a noose around their necks. The government knows that it is going to cost them more and more year on year as the number of pensioners in this country, the proportion of pensioners in this country, gets bigger and bigger. One way that the Conservatives are looking at to try and work around the triple lock is by tinkering with the way they calculate average earnings. So at the moment, the triple lock is calculated by pensions must rise by inflation 2.5% or average earnings, whichever is the highest. This year, the highest figure is average earnings at 8.5%. Average earnings traditionally is calculated by doing salaries and bonuses, and that's how they do it. But the Conservatives are now thinking of taking bonuses out of the equation. You might not think that amounts to very much, but actually it would mean a rise of 7.6% rather than 8.5%, saving the Treasury about 630 million. Now, whether or not that's going to go ahead is still up for debate. We're hearing pretty mixed messages from Conservative ministers on it at the moment, and Rishi Sunak certainly was not prepared to say that he would continue with the triple lock after the next election. Interestingly, though, Keir Starmer wasn't really prepared to say so either. Angela Rayner spoke to reporters in Liverpool over the last few days and essentially said that she thought the triple lock was probably unsustainable in the long term. I'm paraphrasing, but that was definitely the gist that we were getting from her words. So it was only the SNP who was able to go in really, really hard on this topic. It'll be fascinating to see how it develops over the next few months because, of course, both parties are desperate to get that grey vote, as it isn't very respectfully called. Both parties know that pensioners tend to turn out in great numbers at elections. But they also know that as the number of pensioners gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the triple lock becomes more and more expensive for the Treasury.
Yeah, and one wonders whether perhaps Sir Keir would have gone in on that attack line, bearing in mind the resonance it has in the ballot box, if Angela Rayner hadn't been quite so forthright with those reporters up in Liverpool.
Well, absolutely. It felt a little bit today as though Keir Starmer didn't really have much momentum behind him. He had that inaction man jibe, which did go down pretty well on the Labour backbenchers, and I'm sure some Conservatives are worried that that's going to stick. But otherwise, he had a bit of a scattergun approach. There wasn't much focus. It is quite possible that he wanted to go heavy on the triple lock, which he knows would be very, very damaging for the Conservatives. They particularly are really, really reliant on the pensioner vote. But because of what his deputy said over the last few days, he didn't really have the political capital to do that. Angela Rayner has described her relationship with Keir Starmer as arranged marriage. Wonder if there's a bit of trouble in paradise.
Something else that... Stop laughing, Mark. Something else that did come up, as you would expect, is China. China infiltrating British politics, infiltrating Westminster, and Sir Keir Starmer is pushing for a full audit of UK-China relations.
Yeah, this is a pretty tricky subject for Rishi Sunak, because in that Conservative leadership election last year, Liz Truss said that she would want to designate China as an official threat to the UK if she became Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak didn't go that far, so there are plenty of China hawks in the Conservative Party and outside of it who worry that he's a little bit soft on China. That's probably why Keir Starmer chose to go in on this subject with such sort of ferocity this week, but it landed a little bit flat in the chamber. Sometimes these foreign affairs questions sort of lose the interest of the chamber, rightly or wrongly. It'll be really interesting to see how it does develop, though, because I think we can expect to see some sort of firmer line on China from Sunak in the coming months.
Olivia, and that arranged marriage, thank you very much indeed for updating us there at Westminster. Thanks. Now, who said this? We will be together in the fight against imperialism. Before he got onto the train. Yes, that was Kim Jong-un as he pledged support for President Putin and the war against the West during this visit to the Vostochny Cosmodrome in southeastern Russia.
In other words, a space centre. Following their bilateral talks, President Putin said there were possibilities for military cooperation between Russia and North Korea, opening the door to a possible arms deal.
But no details on that. What they have talked about is a deal possibly on satellites, satellite technology, which may be why they're at the Space Centre or Cosmodrome. Let's get the thoughts now. Bob Seeley, MP, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Bob, thanks for your time. It's interesting that Putin sort of wanted to talk about the offer of satellites, and they were at this satellite centre because, of course, I think the last two launches of North Korean spy satellites have actually failed.
I understand. So, yes, look, both these people want some fairly nefarious things off each other. Putin, frankly, needs a lot of shells, a lot of weaponry. And the one thing that you can reliably depend on with communist states who love to threaten violence against others and love to talk in militaristic terms is that they've got a lot of kit. And I suspect Kim has an awful lot of Soviet-era kit. And frankly, Putin needs some of that stuff. And even if the tanks are very old, they're not being used generally in the Ukraine war in tank-on-tank battles, but more generally as a form of mobile artillery. So these older tanks still have value. And Kim is probably sitting on millions of 152 artillery shells. So all this stuff Putin needs. And if Putin can offer something back, he's more likely to get lots of kit to enable the Russians to fight their intense artillery battles in southern and eastern Ukraine.
Yeah, but could it literally blow up in Putin's face? We're told that, as you say, a lot of it is Soviet era, perhaps not that well looked after, and such armament does become unstable after a while.
Yeah, very good point, and it absolutely does. I suspect Putin's attitude is it's not going to blow up in his face, so he's not too bothered. And if he can get millions of shells, even if they've got a failure rate of 1 in 5, it's probably better than nothing as long as they're not blowing up the barrels of the weapons themselves.
So, Bob, what do we know about what Russia is willing to do in exchange then? I mean, it's been suggested that North Korea is after technology, sensitive technology from Russia.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a question of how desperate the Russians are and what they're going to have to get and what they're going to have to give to Kim in order to get that Soviet-era military kit and those shells, if that's what they're after. So a part of me thinks that they are... they don't want to damage their relationship too much with China. So I suspect anything that they offer Kim is going to be cleared with the Chinese first. I mean, Russia, sadly, is becoming a China vassal state at the moment, effectively a bigger version of North Korea.
Yeah, I was going to ask you where the Chinese fit into this diplomatic jigsaw now, because, of course, we've got America having brought South Korea and Japan together to try and rebalance things. I mean, is this a reassessment now of East versus West?
Sadly, yes. And we are beginning to have that new sort of global division. It didn't have to happen this way, and it's really sad that it's happening. The biggest gainers thus far out of Russia's war in Ukraine is probably China. They're making good money evading sanctions in a crafty way, not in too much of an obvious way. but also the Russians have become increasingly dependent on China. They become increasingly dependent on China in part because they need to be selling their gas and oil to somebody, and so China's getting a good deal on that energy, much cheaper than the West was paying. It's very difficult to reorientate gas supply lines because you've got a lot of physical infrastructure there as well. So the Chinese the Russians are becoming much more dependent on China. Doesn't have to be like that, and actually, it's a terrible thing for China, for Russia in the long run, because the only country that has territorial claims, significant territorial claims, on the Russian Federation is China in eastern Siberia.
Bob Seeley from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your reaction to that.
Well, from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee to the Defence Select Committee, because its chairman, Tobias Ellwood, faces what could be his reckoning today because he is meeting with members of the committee ahead of a possible vote of no confidence concerning him tomorrow.
Yeah, we heard about this earlier, of course, from Mark Francois here in the studio. The controversy stemming from this visit and this video in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan early this year, in which he appeared to praise the regime for its security in the region, urging Britain to reopen relations with the country, and Mr Elwood being accused of serving as a willing propagandist, rather, for the regime.
Well, our political editor, Christopher Hope, has got more on this exclusive. Christopher, Tobias Ellwood, I think it was over the summer, did admit he'd got it wrong, but members were furious, apparently branding him an bleep idiot.
Careful, Pippa. Yes, that's right. They are very, very cross with him. They feel that he's gone too far this time. Of course, he's the Defence Select Committee chairman since January 2020. He gets a £16,000 a year salary bump to do that job, to speak on behalf of the committee. But he has been going outside of that role recently, not least, and the final straw for many of them was what they call this Taliban tourism video. And he went to Afghanistan and spoke about how well the Taliban were doing there, and that annoyed some of them. He's been called to a meeting that's happening right now. It started at 2 o'clock to explain himself. A motion of no confidence. Remember that with Boris Johnson. Well, one of those has been tabled against him on this committee, on the Defence Select Committee. They'll decide at the end of that meeting whether to push that motion to a vote. And I think right now, Tobias Ellwood is fighting for his political career.
Does the committee actually have the power then to put him onto the back benches effectively?
That's right, it does, because it's like having confidence of your work colleagues or wherever you might be, Mark. If they feel that the leadership you're following is not what they want to be, then that person can be moved and pushed out. He will need a couple of Tory MPs on that group to vote against him. So I think it may end up him being a more chastened and bring himself back to where the committee wants. Because if you're committee chairman, you've got to do things on behalf of the committee and not go your own way. I think that's the point this time.
Chris, we will of course stay across that, but let's also talk about ticket offices, these controversial closures that were out to consultation. Now, we've been hearing that Tory MPs are really angry over further plans to close them. What are they saying?
Well, they're furious, Pippa, because the government or the rail delivery group, the group which runs our rail network in England, is looking at closing ticket offices across the country. And today it's interesting because around 20 Tory MPs lined up in the Westminster Hall behind me, which is the second main chamber in the House of Commons, to attack these plans. And the scale of the attack, I think, will worry the government. It's not really subject to a vote, at least not a vote organised by the government, but Labour could do something about that if they wanted to. But I think the scale of the upset on the backbenches is serious. And with me now is Chris Loder. He's the Tory MP for West Dorset. Chris Loder, you were there in that meeting. What was it like?
Well, I led the debate in Westminster Hall this morning at 9:30. I think it was probably one of the best attended debates I have ever seen in Westminster Hall, which I think really furthers the message that collectively the whole House of Commons has significant reservations about the current proposals that the rail industry has put forward. The points I made in the debate specifically this morning were that what is being proposed, i.e. staff coming from behind the glass or the window to go out on the station, is actually not strictly right. Certainly not for me in West Dorset, where my local operator is actually proposing to reduce staffing hours of stations by more than 50%.
And the reason why you care, Chris, is you once worked on railways yourself.
I did. When I left school, my first job was as a station assistant, and I worked for the railways for 20 years before being elected. So for me, this matters a lot. As someone who worked for the railway, who cares deeply for the railway, for its continued growth, and for those people who have given their life in service to helping people move around the United Kingdom.
Do you think then the government must drop these plans, and will it be a vote loser at the next election?
So the process basically is that the rail industry consults on, or the watchdog has consulted on the rail industry plan. That's all being wrapped up, and that then goes to the ministers for, in effect, a sign-off or a veto. The purpose of today was to make the message loud and clear to the ministers that a good number of us have reservations about this. You know, I personally, I'm not opposed to reform. I think it's important that it should have happened before, but to the extent we're seeing today, the proposal before us today, I think it's a step too far.
There we have it, Mark and Pippa. Chris Loder, Tory MP there for West Dorset, making quite clear there's a big concern, I think, amongst backbenchers on the Tory party. We're seeing it for the first time today in Westminster about these rather controversial closures to railway ticket offices. Over to you. Thank you.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Chris. Stay with us here on the live desk. We'll be bringing you the latest on those devastating floods in Libya, where we understand the death toll may now hit 20,000. You're with GB News.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News. That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other pay-per-review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk. Let's update you now on this extraordinary devastation in the east of Libya, where emergency workers say they've recovered so far more than 5,300 bodies. The number expected maybe to even double after what was described as a catastrophic tsunami flood swept through the eastern coastal city of Derna.
Thousands are still missing, with bodies washing up on beaches along the waterfront. Multiple dams had burst after torrential storms, flooding entire neighbourhoods and sweeping people out into the Mediterranean.
Well, the International Organisation for Migration says 30,000 people have been displaced by the disaster, and the political fracturing of Libya is complicating any international aid or rescue efforts. Let's speak now to Andrew Thomas, who's media officer for the International Federation for the Red Cross. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And just to explain, of course, the government in Tripoli in the west, this in the east, very difficult to find out, I guess, what the command and control structure is.
That's right, and we stay out of the politics, as you can imagine a politically neutral organisation like ours needs to. But our partner affiliate on the ground in Libya, the Libyan Red Crescent, has always been politically neutral and has worked with both the governments in that country and has so far faced no resistance with the aid that they are providing. Now, of course, they are only one organisation, but they are doing their best, and they've been there since before this disaster. The preparatory work that goes on, the training of volunteers, even in the city of Derna, we had volunteers, and then there was a risk that this might happen. There was some speculation that a flood might occur. Then it did occur, and they were the first on the ground to help with the search and recovery efforts. Tragically, 3 of the members of the Libyan Red Crescent actually died in this flood. But there are many more hundreds who didn't, who are helping the survivors and trying to establish some kind of life for those people who have survived. But as you can see in these pictures, the devastation in the city just goes almost beyond imagination. It is truly horrific.
What is the first thing to do? I mean, we're being told that bodies, and this is upsetting for people, and the families have disappeared, are being washed up on the beaches, coming back in from the Mediterranean after they were swept out to sea.
There are certainly bodies in the streets, and yes, you're right, some are on the beaches as well, and retrieving those bodies and giving them a dignified burial is one of the things that the Red Crescent volunteers there on the ground in Derna and other cities and towns along that coastline are doing. We as an organisation, or the Libyan Red Crescent in Libya has already distributed 500 body bags, and they are collecting those bodies in a dignified way and making sure they get a dignified burial, as well as reuniting families, finding people who've been displaced. The communications are down there and bringing them back together, to the relief of some. Thankfully, not everybody who went missing initially did die. Obviously, a huge number did, but many have survived, and bringing them back together is another crucial part of the work of the Libyan Red Crescent and others too. I want to say to your viewers, though, we have, as an international organisation, launched an appeal. If they go to the British Red Cross website page, they can donate money. We are aiming to raise 10 million Swiss francs. That's just shy of £9 million for this appeal, and that money will go to the Libyan Red Crescent. It will help to buy and then distribute shelter, tents, food, clean water, because what we don't want here is a disaster within a disaster. Already, this has been horrific enough for this part of Libya. What we do not want now is a disaster of disease or worse.
What is access like, Andrew, into this area? I know international aid is starting to get through, but how difficult is it to bring it to people?
Very difficult, but it's better than it was 24 hours ago. 24 hours ago, they couldn't even get into the city. All the roads into that city of Derna were completely washed away or blocked. The authorities there in Libya have now reopened some roads, so at least aid can get into the city. And indeed, 3 flights have flown in from Turkey in the last 24 hours. On board some of those flights were some Red Crescent volunteers from Turkey, and those flights carried aid in as well. There is also aid that's arrived in from Egypt, and I know other aid is on its way. It can now get into the city. Now, that's not to say that all areas of the city are accessible. Many areas are still underwater. The water is still deep in some streets, but other areas are accessible, and that aid needs to get there. There is one hospital. There was one hospital in Derna. It was destroyed by this inland tsunami, if you like. There is no medical treatment going on in that hospital at all. There needs now to be much more localised treatment for people who've been injured in this, and of course for people to get clean water and to make sure that they can survive the aftermath now.
Yeah, we understand the Italians have got a ship that sailed with perhaps something akin to a field hospital on board to try and ameliorate the situation. But as you touched on, I guess now the danger is, given so much stagnant water left and the number of bodies, cholera and other diseases can break out very quickly.
They can, and that's exactly what we're trying to ward against. And that's why clean water is so important. That is why local health facilities like that field hospital you talk about on the Italian ship are so important too. But that is always the danger after a disaster of this scale. What is, quite remarkable is I and others were sitting just 3 days ago talking about the devastation in Morocco. Some of these. Don't forget that, right? Morocco is still in a bad place. We have another emergency appeal for Morocco as well. I'm not trying to compare disasters here, and it is horrific that 2 have happened in the space of, 3 or 4 days, but they have happened, and the world needs to respond. It needs to step up, because people's lives are worth living, and this needs to be reconciled with all the other things going on right now. There needs to be support for those 2 countries.
Real human disasters. Well, Andrew Thomas from the Red Cross, thank you very much indeed for joining us there in Switzerland. Thank you.
Yeah, just terrible. Let's get your news headlines now with Polly Middlehurst.
Good afternoon. The top stories this hour, and our top story is that Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Prime Minister of failing the country during a heated Prime Minister's questions. He attacked Rishi Sunak's record on the criminal justice system, immigration and security. It follows the escape of terror suspect Daniel Khalif and the China spy scandal in Westminster. Sir Keir said the Prime Minister couldn't be trusted to protect the economy. Rishi Sunak, however, hit back, accusing Sir Keir of being a conviction-free politician. Meanwhile, the Shadow Environment Secretary has said nothing represents 13 years of Conservative failure more graphically than the sight of stinking, toxic sewage pouring into our rivers, lakes and seas. Steve Reed says Tories cut back on monitoring the water companies, but the government says they're cleaning up the mess that Labour left. The Chancellor says the government's sticking to its plan to halve inflation as the UK economy shrunk by 0.5% in July. Jeremy Hunt says he remains confident about the future, saying the country quickly recovered from the pandemic and is now growing faster than countries like Germany and Italy in the long term. But Labour says the economy's contraction is a failing of the government. And the former chief financial officer and 3 others from the collapsed bakery chain Patisserie Valerie have been charged with conspiracy to defraud. The Serious Fraud Office says it's charged Christopher Marsh and his wife, along with a financial controller and financial consultant, in relation to the alleged offence. The Fraud Office accused them of conspiring to inflate cash indicators on the balance sheet, as well as altering annual reports from 2015 to 2018. They'll appear at Westminster Magistrates Court next month. Those are the headlines. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. Let's bring you some breaking news we're getting from Surrey police, who say that the father of Sarah Sharif, the little girl, a 10-year-old found dead in Woking in Surrey, is on his way back with his partner Bainash Batul and brother Faisal Malik from Pakistan. Of course, all wanted for questioning over the 10-year-old's death.
Yes, it's understood that they have been in hiding for a month now after fleeing to Pakistan on August the 9th with 5 children, leaving the body of their daughter, their eldest daughter, Sarah, behind. She suffered what's been described as multiple and extensive injuries over quite a period of time, and her body was found a day later at the family's home in Woking. Her father, Mr. Sharif, alerted police from an unknown location in Pakistan where he had gone into hiding, and indeed he appeared in a video a few days ago with his current partner.
We understand from Surrey Police that they boarded a flight from Pakistan this morning, travelling via Dubai. So they're due to land at Gatwick at 7:45 tonight, where they will be met by Surrey Police, who say that it may well be then that they are taken into custody. But we'll get more details for you as they come through from Surrey Police.
The UK economy shrank by 0.5% in July. That's according to the Office for National Statistics.
Well, it's putting pressure on the Bank of England. Of course, they're meeting next week, the Monetary Policy Committee, to decide what to do on the base rate, and suggestions, of course, that they could go even higher above the 5.25% current rate. Fears that any further rises, though, could drive the economy into recession. Let's get more with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. So on the face of it, a 0.5% decline in the economy, pretty alarming, but it's quite specific. Strike action and bad weather.
Yeah, I think this month is a bit of a one-off. GDP, all goods and services traded in the economy, fell by 0.5 of 1%, so 0.5% compared to July last year. Though in the second quarter, revised figures show April, May, June, the economy actually grew by 0.2%, which isn't too bad. Let's have a little look at these numbers now. So it came out this morning at 7 a.m, GDP down 0.5% in July. The ONS said it was mainly due to the wet weather and also strike activity, which hit GDP, in particular in the health service. All those strikes, they're a big part of Britain's service sector. The way we measure our public services goes into GDP. An interest rate rise is now less likely on the 21st of September, but I still think it's more likely than not. That will be the 15th interest rate rise in a row. And as I said, even though the headline number for July is a negative contraction, in the second quarter, April, May, June, the economy actually grew 0.2%. Internationally, the UK is doing OK among the big economies. It's not in recession like Germany. But
two subsequent quarters, let's remember, of negative growth. Yeah.
But it's growing slower than America. So now we've found all that extra growth down the back of the nation's sofa. We're sort of middle of the pack of the G7.
I heard someone describe the economy today, the way it's going at the moment. It's all the time. It's snakes and ladders.
It's absolutely snakes and ladders. We get some really good news, like new investment in car plants. We've had at Ellesmere Port, BMW in Cowley, a new gigafactory promised by Tata over there in Somerset. The UK figures showing we're actually still a leading manufacturing power, manufacturing more value than France over recent years. And then you have a negative GDP number. And here's another sort of snake rather than ladder. I think, I'm afraid to say, that when the next inflation number comes out for August, which will be on the 20th of September, before the Bank of England makes that interest rate decision, I'm concerned that inflation rate will be higher than in July, 6.8% in July, and that's because of an oil price surge and the increases that we've seen in petrol and diesel prices during August, which many GB News viewers have been in touch about.
I spoke about the petrol forecourt price with you, 2 days ago? Yeah. It's gone up another 2 pence per litre on my forecourt. And that's going to feed in directly, because on diesel, of course, it feeds into transport costs and it is a direct impact on inflation.
And we know that the petrol retailers, or at least the oil majors, sometimes the independent retailers don't get the margin, but, you know, as soon as oil prices go up, petrol prices go up almost immediately. Yeah. But it's not the same when they come down. And we've seen a 30% rise in oil prices over the last, since the end of June, which has been barely remarked upon, but it's really feeding into the cost of transport and inflation.
And is this just because of what Saudi Arabia and Russia are doing, or are the oil brokers also looking at the time of year and thinking, you know, people need their heating oil, they want a bit more transport to get out and about, and they're maybe just sort of trying to hedge a little bit?
Well, the oil market is absolutely huge. There's no way you can really influence the price if you're you're a trader. You can certainly influence the price if you're OPEC or even OPEC plus. That's OPEC plus Russia.
Yeah.
So OPEC plus Russia, they control over half of global oil production. And they control 90% of all known oil reserves. It's fashionable among certain circles in Westminster to say OPEC doesn't matter anymore. If you say that, you know nothing about global energy markets. And a lot of the reason for this hike in oil prices is happening even though China's slowing down. As China slows down, biggest importer now of oil, you'd expect the demand for oil to go down or the price to go down. But even though China's slowing down, the price of oil is shooting up. And that's largely because of the intervention of the OPEC export cartel.
$90+ at the moment?
Yeah, it's flirting with $91, $92, the first time it's been in that range since last November. My fear is if the markets get $100 a barrel in their sights, then it becomes a foregone
It's something they try and aim for.
And that will feed directly into inflation.
Liam, thank you very much indeed.
Quite a lovely story to bring you now, because the London Taxi Charity has hosted an event to celebrate World War II veterans. Surrounded by iconic planes at Biggin Hill Heritage Hangar, the veterans reminisced as they were entertained.
Well, one Chelsea pensioner taking to the skies in a Spitfire for a day that we'll, always remember. GB News London reporter Lisa Hartle has more for us.
World War II veterans stood in front of the iconic Spitfire. A plane that holds so many memories for them, this day was about reminiscing. The Veterans Taxi Charity invited them along with other veterans to Biggin Hill Heritage Hangar in South London.
I feel like a little boy sitting with these aircraft here, truthfully.
Henry was in the Royal Navy during the Second World War. On D-Day, he found himself on HMS Eastway and was asked to be a message carrier.
Got to France, went alongside, emptied out all the stores and some of the soldiers they had on board. Turned round. By that time I'd looked over the side and thought, oops, it's not pleasant what I saw. Soldiers, bodies floating and debris and all that sort of thing. Going to France, when you don't know what you're going to, or where you're going, in fact, 50% is apprehension. I won't say cowardice or anything, I don't believe that. Apprehension. And the other 50% was a little bit of excitement, really, until you actually get there.
Dorothea Barron was part of the Wrens during the Second World War.
I think just talking to people is great fun, and swapping ideas and reminiscences. It's lovely to talk to them and to know what they're doing now and how we're all getting deafer. And I think they've got better figures than most people I have nowadays. You don't see the great pot-bellied men that you do these days.
As the other veterans watched, Chelsea pensioner Mike Smith was invited to fly in a Spitfire.
It was absolutely awesome. Awesome, amazing, all of the above. To be able to fly in one of these and to be actually flying in one of these over Dover and the Channel, having read all the seen the documentaries, read all the history, and then actually flown in a Spitfire was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
The event was funded by the taxi charity ambassador Johnny Gallagher.
My granddad was in 2 wars and I grew up really close to my granddad, and I just grew up with that generation and I really respected what they did. I mean, that's an understatement. When you get to know the charity, you realise how much these days mean to them, you know, because they're lonely people, and, you know, something like this, something to look forward to, keeps them going. So when I do events like this, it makes them realise that a younger generation does care about them. Bravery is the word. I mean, they're 16, 17 years old going to war.
The charity arranged days like this for veterans throughout the year, giving back to the generation that sacrificed so much. Lisa Hartle, GB News, London.
Wonderful sights and sounds. Now it's back British Farming Day, an annual National Farmers Union campaign to support the British food and farming industry by buying British.
Food and Farming Secretary Therese Coffey has today provided a boost to British farmers with a package of measures and help to provide them with the cash flow they need to invest in their businesses. Let's go to our national reporter Ellie Costello. The last time we saw her was on a tractor. Oh, she's off. Have you been doing much work?
I'm off.
Or just tooting, Ellie, like you were last time?
Well, yeah. Well, all I actually managed to do was toot the horn. They didn't trust me to plough the field behind me. I did ask, though, Mark. I did set that challenge, but they didn't trust me, and I don't blame them. So I am in Childerditch Farms today, which is 1,600 acres in Essex. And let me show you what they make, because it's oat, barley and wheat. We've got a big bucket of it here. So at the breakfast table in Great Britain, if you're tucking into your cereal and your bread, or perhaps you're making bread with flour, this is what you'll be using. And 9 times out of 10, it's coming from a Great British farmer. So that's what happens on this farm here in Childerditch. And the eagle-eyed viewers amongst you may have noticed at PMQs today that many MPs were wearing this lapel badge, a sheaf of wheat. And that's because it is Back British Farming Day today. And we have a Great British farmer with us now, Ed Ford, who is a partner at Childerditch Farms. Good afternoon to you, Ed. And I wanted to ask you about PMQs, because we heard from Therese Coffey, didn't we, the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and she set out this package, didn't she, of grants, of support, of accelerated payments for farmers who wish to be sustainable on their farms, putting things in like solar panels. What did you make of that package of support?
So basically what today she announced was an acceleration of payments for farmers who are signed up for the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme. By October, will be paid their first tranche of money by the end of this year. And obviously we were promised, with the diminishing BPS payment, the basic payment scheme, we were promised a smooth transition into SFI, and the process thus far has been far from smooth.
I'm sensing disappointment from you. What would you have liked to have heard from Therese Coffey this afternoon?
We would have liked to see a smooth transition, payments remaining the same. Obviously, that has not been the case, and what has happened with the SFI, the scheme has been delayed, it has been changed, things have been chopped and changed around, and it just hasn't been as smooth and less bureaucracy, less red tape we were also promised, and it simply hasn't happened.
OK, we're talking to you now on Great British Farming Day. Just very briefly, why is it so important that people buy British?
Since Brexit, we left the EU and we're on our own out in the UK now. We are up against trade deals of food being imported from other countries of a lesser standard and less welfare. If you buy British, buy Red Tractor labelled food, you know it's of a high standard, produced the highest welfare standards and of the best quality.
OK, Ed, thank you so much. Really good to be with you all of today in Essex. And you heard the man. If you are shopping today, if you're in the supermarket, do look for that Red Tractor label. It says that it's British. It says it's the highest standard, grown to the highest welfare, and it's made by a local farmer.
Ellie, thank you very much for updating us there on this special day.
Just bring you the latest on this breaking news we're getting, and that is that the family of Sarah Sharif, who was found dead at her home in Woking last month, they are now said to be on a flight to the UK. The group includes the 10-year-old's father, Irfan, his partner, Banish Batul, and brother, Faisal Malik. They're wanted for questioning over the little girl's death.
Due to land at Gatwick 7:45, Surrey police say they will be there to meet the flight. We'll have all the latest for you here on GB News. Stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. After a fine but chilly start for some of us this morning, we are going to see some wet and windy weather arriving in the northwest. Meanwhile, most places staying dry and sunny. That's because high pressure is dominating the picture across the UK at the moment, though there is this low waiting out in the Atlantic with its associated fronts. As we look through this afternoon then across much of England and Wales, plenty of fine sunny weather, though watch out for a few showers developing towards the southeast. Then we have some clouds, some rain and strong winds pushing in across parts of Northern Ireland and into western Scotland this afternoon. We are going to see temperatures a little bit lower than recent days, but still getting to highs of around 22, perhaps 23 Celsius in the south. south. A bit cooler further north and feeling cooler as the wet and windy weather sweeps in. That rain then is going to push its